Welcome to this new episode. Today, we're diving into the most terrifying shark attacks ever recorded. From swimmers caught off guard to surfers stalked in open waters, these real-life encounters show just how deadly the ocean can be. Let's begin with the first story. It was a clear summer morning in Adelaide. The air cool enough to make you shiver for a moment, but the warmth of the day was already starting to settle in. Kai, just 15 years old, stood at the edge of the Southern Adelaide Surf Club, gazing out over the bay, his eyes still wide with the youthful energy of someone who had just come into his own as a surfer, followed the rhythmic dance of the waves. His love for the ocean ran deep, far deeper than any of the other sports he tried over the years, from soccer to basketball. Surfing was his true passion, his lifeblood. He had started early, joining the Micrograms Junior Surf Club at 7. His love for the sport was unquestionable, and by the time he was 10, he was already competing for SEView Road Board Riders, one of the oldest clubs in the country. His family, always supportive, was quick to load up the car for road trips to competitions. Their weekends were filled with the hum of the car on long drives, the sound of laughter, and the satisfaction of being near the water. But no journey, no competition would come to define Kai's life like the one he took on December 28, 2023. It was supposed to be a family holiday, a brief escape from their everyday lives. The Yorke Peninsula, with its well-known surf spots, seemed like the perfect place for a break. The family arrived at Eel Beach with high hopes for a good session. The skies, however, were overcast, the clouds hanging low and heavy above the sea. Still, Kai wasn't about to back down. He'd surfed in worse conditions. The ocean was his domain, no matter the weather. The waves at Ethel's Ledge were known for being challenging, an ideal spot for a surfer of Kai's ability. But on this day, the conditions weren't great. Still, Kai paddled out with his father close behind him, determined to make the most of the opportunity. The water, cold and gray, seemed more ominous than usual, but Kai ignored the nagging feeling that had begun to creep in. Far beneath the surface, something else was stirring. The shark, a great white weighing in at over 700 kilograms, was hunting. It moved silently through the murky depths, its keen senses alert to the presence of prey. The shark was not hunting out of hunger but out of instinct, an opportunistic feeder waiting for a moment to strike. Kai's father, older but still fit, was trailing behind as his son cut through the water. Kai was agile, carving through the waves with ease, while his father struggled to keep up. For him, these moments were about more than the sport. It was about the shared experience, the road trips with his son, the time spent together. Yet, as they surfed, they were unaware of the true danger lurking in the water. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Kai paddled past the breakers, ready for another wave. The shark, sensing the movement above, honed in on its target. With ruthless precision, it shot upward, its jaws gaping wide. The first strike was brutal. Kai was knocked off his board, and before he could react, the shark's teeth sank deep into his leg. The force of the attack pulled him under the surface. Kai's heart raced, his mind scrambling to understand what was happening. His father, having just caught a wave, turned back at the sound of his son's cry. His eyes locked onto the scene unfolding in the water. His son struggling, being dragged under by the enormous shark. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't reach him in time. His son, the one he had spent years training and growing alongside, was being torn apart by a creature from the deep. Kai fought with every ounce of strength he had, the pain in his leg excruciating as the shark tightened its grip. His father's voice reached him, urging him to swim to shore. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but the blood loss was already starting to take its toll. The water around him turned crimson as the shark's grip severed an artery, draining Kai of the strength he needed to make it to safety. Tim Phillips, a local surfer perched on the cliffs above, watched the scene unfold. His heart raced as he saw the desperate struggle below. Without a second thought, he grabbed a board and dove into the water, paddling furiously toward the boy. The shark, its predatory instincts still sharp, circled Kai, waiting for him to weaken. Tim's thoughts were a blur as he reached the unconscious boy. The water was thick with the smell of blood, and every instinct told him to retreat. But Kai needed him. Just as Tim grabbed the boy and attempted to swim him to safety, the shark circled again. It was massive, its dark body looming beneath the water. Tim's pulse hammered in his chest, but he knew he had no choice. He had to get Kai back to shore. With the shark still nearby, he secured the boy onto the board and they made their way back to the beach. By the time they reached the shallows, others had arrived to help. But despite their efforts, despite the rush of emergency services, it was too late. Kai, still limp on the sand, had lost too much blood. The boy who had carved through waves with such ease, who had loved the ocean more than anything, had succumbed to his injuries. Kai was the third shark victim in Australian waters that year. The surfing community, stunned by the loss of such a young, promising talent, rallied around his family. The heartbreak was immeasurable. Kai's love for the sea, for surfing, had come at a cost. But those who knew him would never forget the way he lived, the way he embraced life with every wave he caught, every moment he shared with his family and friends. What he loved more than anything in the world, more than surfing, was his family. He had grown up surfing with his uncle and spent huge amounts of time with his younger brother, Jet. They had laughed together, played together, surfed together. It was the family road trips, the hours spent in the car traveling for competitions, that his father cherished the most. Just being with his son, talking, sharing the ride. It was these moments that would now be haunted by the loss of his son. At his memorial service on Seaford Beach, surfers gathered in a solemn circle in the water, a silent tribute to the boy taken too soon. Kai's family, his father, mother, and younger brother, stood at the center, surrounded by those who loved him. They chanted his favorite words, "Just one more wave." As if moved by their grief, the sea swelled gently, its waves rolling in as if to bid a final farewell to a boy who would never be forgotten. It was June 7th, 2015, and the beaches along Tampa Bay, Florida were packed with hundreds of weekend visitors seeking relief from the scorching summer heat. Clearwater Beach, known for its pristine white sand and crystal clear waters, had drawn over 500 people that Sunday afternoon. But what started as a perfect beach day would soon turn into one of Florida's most tragic shark encounters. Sarah Ann Peterson never imagined this would be her last family beach day. At 34, the dedicated elementary school teacher had built a beautiful life in Tampa Bay since moving from Minnesota 5 years earlier. Her classroom at Clearwater Elementary was famous for its marine life theme, reflecting her love for the ocean. Each Sunday, she'd pack elaborate picnics and spend hours with her 4 children at the beach, a tradition that helped them adjust after leaving their inland home. That morning had started like any other beach day. Sarah packed their usual supplies while her children, Jessica, 11 years old, twins Thomas and Tyler, 8 years old, and little Emily, 5 years old, bounced around the kitchen with excitement. Her husband Michael, a sales executive, was away in Seattle on business, but had promised to be back for next weekend's beach trip. It would be a promise he couldn't keep. The conditions that day were unusual. Recent heavy rains had caused the nearby river to dump massive amounts of fresh water and silt into the bay. Just 2 weeks earlier, a teenage surfer had been bitten by what experts identified as a bull shark less than a mile from this spot. The attack had prompted increased patrols, but the combination of weekend crowds and poor visibility made monitoring difficult. Bull sharks are among Florida's most dangerous coastal predators, particularly along the Gulf Coast where numerous rivers empty into the sea. Unlike other shark species, they possess unique biological adaptations allowing them to move freely between salt and fresh water. Their specialized kidneys can process both environments, enabling them to swim miles upstream into rivers and hunt in waters where most sharks cannot survive. Since 1882, Florida has recorded over 500 shark attacks, with bull sharks responsible for more shallow water incidents than any other species. By early afternoon, Sarah and her children had settled into their usual spot between two lifeguard towers. The twins were engaged in their weekly sandcastle competition, while Jessica read her book under the shade of their blue umbrella. The morning had been perfect, filled with laughter, swimming, and shell collecting. Emily, the youngest, had been particularly proud of finding an intact sand dollar. At 2:15 p.m., the tide was coming in strong. Sarah stood in knee-deep water with Emily, pointing out small fish darting around their feet. The water temperature had reached 82 degrees, unusually warm for early June. The other children remained on the beach, the twins still arguing over whose sandcastle tower was taller. The first sign of danger came when a school of mullet suddenly burst from the water's surface near Sarah and Emily. The water became eerily still, a phenomenon marine biologists call the calm before the strike. In that split second, Sarah's instincts as a mother overrode everything else. Without hesitation, Sarah grabbed Emily and thrust her toward the shore. The 5-year-old landed in shallow water just as an 8-foot bull shark erupted from the depths, its massive claws clamping down on Sarah's lower body. The water around her instantly turned crimson. The peaceful Sunday afternoon erupted into chaos as beachgoers realized what was happening. The shark's initial strike was devastating. Sarah was thrown sideways as the predator shook her violently. Lifeguards Jane Martinez and Katie Collins raced into the water with their rescue boards, while hundreds of horrified beachgoers scrambled out. The Peterson children watched in terror as their mother fought for her life, Jessica instinctively pulling her younger siblings close. The shark released Sarah momentarily before attacking again, a behavior typical of bull sharks who often retreat briefly to assess their prey's condition. Unlike great whites that typically strike once and wait, bull sharks are known for their repeated aggressive attacks, a hunting strategy refined over millions of years. The predator circled back, this time grabbing Sarah's right leg with its powerful jaws capable of exerting over 1,300 pounds of pressure per square inch. The rescue attempt was as dangerous as it was desperate. Martinez reached Sarah first, grabbing her upper body, while Collins positioned her rescue board as a barrier between the victim and the circling shark. A third lifeguard, David Torres, joined them with an additional board, creating a protective triangle around Sarah. The bull shark, still aggressive, made several attempts to break their defensive formation. Only when all 3 lifeguards began striking the water surface with their boards did the predator finally retreat into the deeper water. Working quickly in the blood-filled water, the lifeguards managed to lift Sarah onto the rescue board. The journey back to shore was agonizing. They had to move swiftly while keeping her stable, knowing every second was critical. Other lifeguards had cleared a path through the crowd and prepared an emergency treatment area on the beach. By the time emergency services arrived, Sarah had lost a devastating amount of blood. Despite immediate medical attention on the beach and in the ambulance, Sarah Ann Peterson was pronounced dead en route to Tampa General Hospital. Her last words were asking about her children's safety. Michael Peterson was still in the air somewhere over Colorado when he received the news. He would later find his children at their Aunt Karen's house, huddled together, their beach towels still damp from a day that had started so perfectly and ended in tragedy. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing patterns that shook the Florida coastal community to its core. The bull shark attack on the teenage surfer 2 weeks earlier had been downplayed by local authorities as an isolated incident. The victim, 17-year-old Mark Thompson, had survived with severe leg injuries, but the attack should have triggered more extensive safety protocols. Local fishermen had repeatedly reported increasing shark activity near the river mouth, documenting over a dozen sightings in the weeks leading up to Sarah's death. What particularly horrified investigators and the public was the discovery of multiple ignored warnings. 3 different fishing charter operators had formerly reported aggressive bull shark behavior near the river mouth to the Marine Safety Office. They observed the sharks following their boats unusually close to shore, a behavior typically associated with territorial hunting patterns. These reports, filed between the first attack and Sarah's death, had been logged but not acted upon due to what officials later admitted was bureaucratic oversight. The beach safety protocols in place were found to be severely outdated. While red flags had been raised that day, there was no specific warning system for shark activity, despite Clearwater Beach's proximity to known bull shark hunting grounds. The combination of murky water conditions and the recent attack should have triggered an immediate water evacuation, according to marine safety experts who later reviewed the case. The bull shark was never caught. These predators can live up to 32 years, and their territorial nature often leads them back to successful hunting grounds. Sarah's death serves as a sobering reminder that some of the most dangerous predators lurk in the shallowest waters, taking unsuspecting victims to their final fate. April 11, 2022 was humid and gray off the southern coast of Bali. The tide was steady, the surf gentle, and visibility already dropping as morning rain clouds built along the horizon. Most locals stayed out of the water on days like that, especially near the deeper reef shelves where currents shift and predators roam. But to 30-year-old Derek Wincombe, it was perfect. He'd flown in from California the week before, chasing adventure on a 6-month break from his job in web development. Friends back home followed his every move online. Clips of him freediving in cenotes, balancing on narrow ridge trails, grilling seafood on remote beaches. The next post was supposed to be his best yet, filmed alone in murky water, surrounded by bait. Derek was the kind of person who craved intensity. He wasn't reckless in the way people usually meant. He researched gear, read travel advisories, and talked to locals. But once he felt confident, he didn't hesitate. He thrived on doing what others wouldn't, hiking into active volcano zones, spearfishing without a partner, diving into dark water for the rush of it. Friends called him bold. His parents called him stubborn. Derek called it living. The waters off southern Bali are beautiful but dangerous in ways that don't always show on the surface. Beneath the bright shallows lie drop-offs that plunge hundreds of feet, where tiger sharks, oceanic whitetips, and other predators roam. Rainfall brings silt and runoff from inland, reducing visibility to just a few feet. And when tourists chum the water, cutting baitfish to lure in bigger species for photos or sport, it blurs the line between curiosity and risk. Locals knew better. Derek didn't listen. Derek rented gear from a local dive shack and set out alone just after 9 a.m., a short scooter ride from his guest house. Locals who saw him off didn't say much, just exchanged looks. Most fishermen avoided solo spearfishing runs, especially in murky conditions. It wasn't just the reduced visibility, it was what reduced visibility attracted. Derek, however, was undeterred. He strapped on his GoPro, secured his spear gun, and paddled out with a mesh bag of chopped baitfish dangling from his hip, chum he planned to use to draw in action for the camera. The reef drop-off where Derek chose to dive was known for tiger sharks and oceanic whitetips. These aren't the slow gliding shadows seen from boats, they're bold, curious apex predators, drawn in by movement, scent, and the vibrations of a wounded fish. Oceanic whitetips in particular have a history of aggressive behavior toward isolated swimmers, especially when bait is in the water. They hunt high in the water column and are known to circle, bump, and strike. Tiger sharks, sometimes called the garbage cans of the sea, are even less discriminating. At over 14 feet long, they can deliver over 1,300 pounds of bite force and often mistake thrashing limbs for prey. In the open ocean, alone and chumming, Derek was mimicking the very things those sharks were designed to find. Derek Wincombe entered the water alone, spear gun in hand, off a remote reef shelf south of Bali. He'd ignored local warnings, skipped hiring a guide, and dragged a pouch of cut bait behind him for dramatic underwater footage. At first, things seemed quiet. Fish darted past, the water glowed green in the filtered light, but visibility dropped fast. As he descended, shadows began to flicker. A tiger shark appeared first, circling slowly. Then another form moved below, smaller, quicker. Derek steadied his grip. The first hit came without warning, a shoulder check that knocked the spear gun loose. Then the real strike followed. Jaws clamped onto his leg, dragging him into a spiral of blood and sand. He kicked, thrashed, tried to reach for the surface, but the current and weight of the animal overpowered him completely. When he failed to return, a search party found only torn wetsuit scraps and a broken spear gun floating near the reef. Derek's body was never recovered. No footage survived, no witnesses saw what happened. Just a series of poor choices in the wrong place. Diving alone, chumming the water, ignoring every warning. And an ocean that doesn't give second chances. When Derek failed to check out of his guest house, the host alerted a local dive shack who confirmed he'd gone out alone that morning and hadn't returned. A small search launched at dawn turned up only his broken spear gun, a torn piece of wetsuit, and his GoPro. Experts reviewing the footage concluded a large shark, likely a tiger or oceanic whitetip, had struck fast and fatally. With no flotation, no dive partner, and no backup, Derek never had a chance. Local fishermen, though saddened, weren't surprised. Shark activity in that reef was common, especially during the rainy season when runoff clouded the water and bait fish gathered. Warning signs were posted, and guides regularly cautioned against solo spearfishing or chumming. Derek's family flew in to collect his belongings, but no remains were ever found. Back in California, friends held a beach memorial, placing flowers beside a screenshot from his last trip. Derek had been bold, curious, and thrill-seeking, but he'd ignored every rule. Diving alone, baiting predators, entering murky waters without support. They weren't the kind of mistakes experienced divers make, just the kind you don't get to make twice. February 4th, 2023 was a scorching summer day in North Fremantle, Australia. Like many other teenagers seeking relief from the relentless heat, 16-year-old Stella Barry and her friends decided to cool off at the Swan River, a popular but seemingly safe alternative to the crowded beaches along the western coast. The river, winding through Perth before spilling into the Indian Ocean, was a familiar hangout spot, a place where they could swim, sunbathe, and enjoy the carefree days of youth. That afternoon, the group arrived at their usual spot along the riverbank, where the water was calm and inviting. They splashed around for a while, floating in the cool water and laughing under the sun. The river, sheltered from ocean waves and teeming with life, felt like the perfect escape. Stella and her friends were enjoying what seemed to be an idyllic summer day, unaware that danger was lurking beneath the surface. At around 3:30 p.m., as the group lounged by the water's edge, something caught Stella's eye, a flash of gray cutting through the river. She sat up, watching as a pod of dolphins appeared, their sleek bodies surfacing as they moved in unison toward the ocean. The sight was mesmerizing. Dolphins were a common but always thrilling presence in the Swan River, and their sudden appearance sent a wave of excitement through the group. Without hesitation, Stella made a decision that would change everything. She jumped into the water. Wanting to get closer to the dolphins, she waded in, paddling toward the pod with a mix of awe and exhilaration. But what she didn't realize was that she wasn't alone in the water. The dolphins had company, a bull shark. Unlike great white sharks, which typically patrol deeper ocean waters, bull sharks have a unique ability that makes them even more dangerous. They can survive in both saltwater and fresh water. Utilizing special glands and kidney adaptations, they can regulate salt levels in their bodies, allowing them to swim far up rivers and estuaries where most other sharks wouldn't survive. This makes them one of the few shark species that can come into direct contact with humans in environments that seem completely safe. And on that day, one had been following the dolphins. As Stella swam out, the bull shark lurked beneath the murky water, its instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. It had been hunting in the river, likely drawn in by the scent of fish or even the dolphins themselves. But in that moment, as it sensed the movement above, its focus shifted. Stella had no idea the terror lurking beneath her. The water was clear near the surface, but the depths concealed a predator that was about to strike. And just as she reached the dolphins, everything changed in an instant. The bull shark surged forward. Stella barely had time to react before an excruciating pain tore through her leg. A force unlike anything she'd ever felt yanked her downward, sending shockwaves of agony through her body. Instinctively, she thrashed, kicking and clawing at whatever had clamped onto her. But her frantic movements only seemed to fuel the predator's aggression. As the water around her turned red, the truth became horrifyingly clear. She was in the jaws of a bull shark. Her screams echoed across the river, piercing through the humid summer air. On the shore, her friends watched in terror, calling her name, pleading for her to fight. But they were powerless. The attack was unfolding right in front of them, but there was nothing they could do except scream for help. Every second felt like an eternity. The water churned violently as the shark dragged her beneath the surface, then let go for just a moment, circling back as if to strike again. Stella fought to keep her head above water, gasping for air as waves of panic and pain surged through her. Her leg felt like it was on fire, the wound gushing blood into the river, attracting the shark even more. The predator, sensing its prey weakening, moved in again, its powerful body slicing through the water with terrifying ease. She kicked with everything she had left, desperate to break free, but her strength was fading. The onlookers on shore could see the massive shadow moving beneath the surface, stalking her. It was a battle of survival, and Stella was running out of time. Just then, a man standing nearby sprang into action. Without hesitation, he plunged into the river, battling against the current as he raced toward Stella. The shark had disappeared for a moment, slipping into the depths, and the man seized his chance. He grabbed hold of her and with all his strength pulled her toward the shore. But Stella's body was limp. She had lost consciousness, whether from the blood loss, shock, or sheer exhaustion, no one could tell. The rescuer fought against the weight of her body, the pull of the water, and the looming fear that the shark could return at any second. By the time he reached the riverbank, emergency responders had already arrived. Police boats patrolled the area, sirens blaring as paramedics rushed forward to attend to Stella. Every second counted. The paramedics worked frantically, applying pressure to her wounds, but the extent of her injuries was catastrophic. The bite had severed arteries, and despite their best efforts, there was nothing they could do. Stella's life slipped away on the banks of the Swan River, her bright future stolen in a heartbeat. The teenage girl who had just moments ago been chasing dolphins was gone. As the news of Stella's death spread, authorities wasted no time in issuing a public warning. They urged people to stay out of the water while a search for the shark was conducted. No one wanted to take another risk. A day later, a 2.5-meter bull shark was caught about a kilometer upstream from where the attack had occurred. Local fishermen had used bait to lure the predator, but what shocked them most was the direction it had come from. Instead of returning to the ocean, the shark had remained deep in the river, far from where people would typically expect such a threat. Rather than euthanizing the animal, officers made the decision to relocate it far out into the ocean, hoping it wouldn't return. Some believed this was the right thing to do. The shark had simply acted on instinct. In the murky water, it may have mistaken Stella for one of the dolphins. But since she was swimming alone, separate from the pod, she became the easier target. Whether a case of mistaken identity or a deliberate strike, the result was the same: a young life lost too soon. The community was shaken. The Swan River had not seen a fatal shark attack in over a century, yet tragedy had struck when no one expected it. Stella's friends, family, and classmates gathered for a vigil, placing flowers and candles at the riverside in her memory. They spoke of her kindness, her infectious energy, and her dreams of traveling the world. She had been a talented athlete, a dedicated hockey player, and a beloved friend. Her loss was immeasurable. It was February 15, 2011, a gray, rain-drenched day along the New South Wales coastline. Bondi Beach, known for its wide white sands and easy surf, was strangely quiet. The rain had started before dawn and hadn't let up since. A light mist clung to the air, muting the sea into a dull smear of green-gray. Normally, this beach welcomes over 2 million people a year, but that day it was nearly empty. A single red flag flapped on the lifeguard tower, signaling rough water and poor visibility. No one paid much attention. Shark sightings around Bondi were rare, and fatal attacks were rarer still, only a few scattered across decades. Statistically speaking, the odds were slim, but statistics don't matter when the water turns red. The group that arrived that afternoon weren't locals. They were 21-year-old American exchange students studying abroad at the University of Sydney. 5 of them: Blake Harrison, Derek Collins, Alicia Ramirez, Tasha Williams, and Marcus Rowe. They had become fast friends in just 6 weeks. Blake, a confident, sun-bleached business major from California, had planned the trip. He was the kind of person who treated beach days like rituals. Flip-flops, frisbee, cold drinks, and jokes that never landed but were always loud. The others were more subdued. Derek was a thoughtful pre-med student from Boston. Alicia was athletic and pragmatic, her environmental science coursework always seeping into conversation. Tasha filmed everything like she was producing a travel blog. And Marcus, quiet, perceptive, kind, never asked to be the center of attention. He just showed up for the people who needed him. They arrived around 2:30 p.m., the sky still spitting rain. The beach was damp and empty, the lot holding only 2 other vehicles. Waves rolled in, steady and wind-churned. A single red warning flag had been raised early that morning, and a lifeguard in a yellow slicker sat perched high in the tower, scanning the water. The group made jokes about having the whole beach to themselves, as if they were getting away with something. But while they were focused on the sky above, none of them thought to wonder what was moving through the water below. They unpacked quickly, tarp, speaker, cooler, and spread out as if they owned the beach. Tasha started filming, narrating with a mock British accent as she introduced their group to the camera. 5 Americans claiming Bondi Beach in the middle of a rainstorm. They laughed, they posed. But beneath the surface, just beyond the breakers, something stirred. The rain clouded the water, but it hadn't driven everything away. Blake laughed off the conditions. They weren't going out far, he said. Just a swim to shake off midterm stress. Something to break up the rainy monotony. No one expected anything unusual, but the water that day held more than current and rain. They spread out a waterproof tarp 100 yards from the tower, weighed it down with backpacks, and cracked open a cooler. For nearly an hour, they played a half-hearted game of frisbee, ate pre-made sandwiches, and passed a speaker around. Tasha filmed short clips for her Instagram story, narrating dramatically in a fake accent. "And here we are," she said, 5 Americans conquering Bondi Beach in the rain. Marcus mostly observed. He was always like that. Quiet, a step behind, but never out of sync. He offered a running commentary of jokes just low enough for only Alicia to hear, which made her laugh even harder. Despite the gray skies and drizzle, there was a real sense of ease between them. The kind of day that, had it ended differently, would have felt golden in memory. At 3:45 p.m., Blake suggested they swim. Tasha declined, preferring to stay dry and watch the bags. The others followed Blake to the shoreline. The water was warm, about 72 degrees Fahrenheit, and the surf was messy but manageable, waves curling at 3 feet high. As they entered, a lifeguard jogged over and warned them to stay within the flags and not go deeper than their chests. Rip currents were active and visibility was poor. They nodded, promising to be cautious. Within minutes, they were waist-deep, laughing and dunking each other. They body surfed clumsily through broken waves, yelled over the wind, and let the current tug at their feet. It felt harmless. It felt fun. No one noticed the subtle pull of the tide, the small drifts that separated them. They didn't notice the distance stretching behind them. Little by little, the group drifted apart. Derek and Alicia stayed closer to shore. Blake and Marcus, both confident swimmers, ventured farther out, eager to catch cleaner waves past the first break. They didn't notice how far they'd gone. From the beach, they were now just two heads bobbing in a slate-colored horizon. The rain blurred their outlines. The sea was no longer shallow and familiar. It had become wide open and unknowable. At 4:16 p.m., Marcus felt something brush his leg, just a bump. He turned, expecting to see Blake, but instead the water exploded. A great white shark, 15 feet long, nearly 2,000 pounds, rose from below in a vertical burst. Its jaws locked onto Marcus's lower body, tearing through flesh and bone in a single brutal motion. The impact lifted Marcus out of the water, his arms flailing as a red spray followed him upward. The shark didn't just bite, it clamped down and shook him violently, as if testing the limits of what it could destroy. Marcus screamed, a raw, panicked sound that carried all the way to shore. Blood fanned out in wide crimson arcs, turning the water cloudy in seconds. Blake was just 6 feet away. He froze. 1 heartbeat, 2, he stared at Marcus, at the gaping jaws, at the thrashing limbs. Then instinct took over. He dove, arms out, kicking furiously toward the horror unfolding beside him. But the water was murky now, brown and red and thick. He couldn't see, couldn't breathe, couldn't find his friend. On shore, Tasha screamed. Alicia and Derek were already swimming back, shouting for help. Lifeguards leapt into action. One launched a jet ski while another grabbed a rescue board and paddled fast into the break. Blake surfaced again, gasping. The shark was gone, so was Marcus. For a moment, the sea went still, just bubbles and a spreading stain. Then a pale form floated into view, face down, 30 feet away. The jet ski reached Marcus first. His body was limp, his legs were mangled below the knee. Lifeguards hoisted him onto the sled and began CPR as they gunned it back toward the sand. Blake was pulled onto the rescue board by a lifeguard who urged him to hold on. By the time they hit shore, a crowd had formed despite the rain. Beachgoers and tourists stood frozen as CPR continued. Paramedics arrived at 4:28 p.m. IV lines were started, blood was administered. At 4:37 p.m., a helicopter from Royal North Shore Hospital landed on the sand. Marcus was airlifted within minutes. At 5:03 p.m., he was declared dead in transit. He never regained consciousness. His cause of death? Exsanguination and massive trauma. The aftermath rippled. Bondi Beach was closed for 3 days. Aerial drones and helicopters scoured the coastline. The shark was never seen again. Experts analyzed the bite radius and concluded it was a great white, likely female and unprovoked. The recent rainfall had stirred sediment and flushed fish closer to shore, creating ideal hunting conditions for apex predators. The students had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. Back on campus, the group unraveled. Tasha deleted all her videos. Alicia stopped going near the water. Derek became withdrawn, his grades slipping. Blake tried to keep it together, but the image of Marcus in the shark's mouth haunted him. He withdrew from his classes, packed a bag, and returned to California. Marcus's parents flew in from Seattle to bring their son home. They met with his friends and the lifeguards who tried to save him, offering quiet thanks instead of blame. They asked only one thing, that people remember him as more than a victim. Later, they donated to a marine research initiative through the University of Sydney, directed not at revenge but at understanding. They didn't want a scholarship in his name, they just wanted fewer families to get the same call. Even so, the university created something small but lasting, the Marcus Rowe Marine Safety Grant, a student-led research fund supporting marine safety awareness and shark migration studies. Blake never spoke at the launch event. He couldn't. He just stood in the back holding the pamphlet in his hands, reading Marcus's name printed on the front. Bondi Beach implemented new safety changes later that year. Visibility alerts were added to daily warnings, lifeguards were trained in faster deployment, shark buoys and underwater sonar sensors were expanded across New South Wales. But none of what happened could be undone that afternoon. Some stories end with answers, this one didn't. It ended with a scream, a red tide, and silence. June 15, 2013 was the kind of Florida evening that felt like it could last forever. On a stretch of beach near Marathon in the Florida Keys, college students gathered around a fire pit, the air thick with salt, smoke, and cheap beer. Music played from a Bluetooth speaker half buried in the sand. Laughter came easy. The stars were bright, it was a summer break. And for Amber Keplar, 21, this was exactly the kind of night she lived for. But some waters, no matter how calm they seem, are never safe to step into, especially when the sun goes down. Amber had driven down from Tallahassee with 3 friends to celebrate the end of finals. She was loud in the best way, with sun-bleached hair, chipped nail polish, and a tendency to burst into song when no one expected it. A journalism major with a part-time waitressing job, she wasn't the type to play it safe. She was the type who jumped in without checking the water. Just before midnight, with most of the group winding down or passed out in camp chairs, Amber and her closest friend Lizzie, still buzzed from drinks and glowing with that carefree recklessness unique to 20-somethings on vacation, decided to skinny dip. It wasn't a dare, it wasn't planned. They just looked at each other, grinned, and ran for the surf, peeling off clothes and tossing them behind as they laughed their way down the sand. Locals had long avoided that particular inlet after dark, not because of tides or currents, but because the nearby dockside fish cleaning stations leaked into the shallows, drawing predators close. But sharks especially were known to patrol the warm coastal waters at night, hunting in silence just beyond the moonlit foam. Bull sharks are among the few large shark species that actively hunt in shallow coastal waters, and at night they become even more dangerous. With poor light to navigate by, they rely on vibration and movement, zeroing in on splashes that mimic struggling fish or injured prey. Unlike great whites that stalk from the deep, bull sharks patrol close to shore, sometimes in less than 3 feet of water. They're territorial, quick to react, and bold enough to strike without hesitation. For swimmers unaware or careless, the line between safe and fatal can disappear in seconds. The 2 girls waded in waist deep, their laughter echoing into the dark. Amber splashed ahead, arms raised, spinning as she fell backward into the water. Her friend stayed closer to shore, shivering from the sudden chill and hesitating from the sudden quiet. Then Amber screamed. It wasn't drawn out, it was sharp, immediate, and followed by thrashing so violent it sent water spraying in all directions. Lizzie turned in time to see Amber's leg disappear beneath the surface. Then her entire body dragged several feet into the deeper channel. She surfaced once, eyes wide, gasping, but the water around her was already tinted with blood. Lizzie swam back to shore in a panic, screaming for help. A few others ran toward the surf, confused, still half drunk. One tried to wade in, but the water was clouded and opaque, the tide pushing against him with eerie calm. Someone called 911 from a cell phone held aloft with shaking hands. Amber washed up 12 minutes later, pulled in by the tide. She was barely conscious, her leg torn open from thigh to knee, her body in shock. Paramedics arrived less than 10 minutes after that, but by then she had lost too much blood. CPR was attempted on the sand, lights flashing against pale faces and glass bottles, but her pulse never returned. She was declared dead at the scene. Officials identified the bite pattern as consistent with a bull shark, likely an adult male, drawn to the noise and motion in a shallow feeding zone. No search for the shark was initiated. The beach was temporarily closed and additional warning signs were installed along the access path. Local anglers had reported frequent shark presence for weeks prior, but without a specific threat, no formal action had been taken. Amber's friends packed up the next morning and drove home in silence. Her family held a small memorial at a marina near their home in Clearwater, where she'd grown up learning to swim, dive, and push boundaries just enough to keep life interesting. She was remembered for her laugh, her boldness, and her habit of diving in without always checking how deep the water was. The beach reopened, the fire pit was cleaned, the tide rolled on like nothing had happened. But for the people who were there that night, it wasn't the shark they remembered, it was the decision, one that never should have been made. It was a warm summer evening in 1935, and the Catalina Channel stretched out like a darkened sheet of glass beneath the fading light. The last streaks of orange clung to the horizon as Dr. Alfred Wilkes and his son Barney prepared to cross the 20-mile expanse from San Pedro to Santa Catalina Island. Their boat, a modest wooden vessel, bobbed gently at the dock, its weathered hull reflecting in the water's surface. Dr. Alfred, a man of 58, had just finished his shift at George's Street Receiving Hospital in Los Angeles, where he had worked long hours tending to the injured and sick. His son, 23-year-old Barney, had traveled from Avalon to meet him. The trip was supposed to be a simple one, a routine passage across waters they had navigated before. Dr. Alfred gave the pull start rope a firm yank. The engine coughed, sputtered, and then fell silent. He tried again, this time with more force. The motor choked before finally roaring to life, the vibrations rattling through the wooden frame. He eased the throttle forward and the boat sliced through the water, leaving the lights of the harbor to fade into the growing darkness. The air carried the sharp scent of salt, and the rhythmic churning of the waves filled the silence between them. Seagulls wheeled overhead, their distant cries swallowed by the vast emptiness. In the stillness of the open ocean, they were utterly alone. Halfway through their journey, the steady hum of the engine changed. A few erratic sputters, a choking cough, then silence. The boat drifted, rocking gently in the quiet. Dr. Alfred and Barney exchanged a look of concern. The fuel tank was empty. Dr. Alfred reached for the pull start, yanking it again and again. Nothing. The boat was dead in the water. They had been so focused on setting off that day that they had neglected to check the fuel. Their only option now was to wait and hope for a passing vessel. Then came the explosion, a sharp, deafening crack from the stern. Flames erupted in a sudden burst of orange, licking hungrily at the wooden frame. The blast had ripped through the engine casing, sending shards of metal into the hull. Water gushed in through the ruptured planks, filling the boat faster than they could bail it out. Dr. Alfred's voice was calm but firm. They had no choice. They had to abandon the vessel. Barney climbed onto the gunwale, took a steadying breath, and leapt into the water. Dr. Alfred followed, plunging into the cold, endless black. They surfaced, gasping, and watched as their boat shuddered and tipped before slipping beneath the waves. For hours they clung to the overturned hull, their bodies growing numb in the frigid water. The night was relentless, the wind slicing through their drenched clothes. The salt stung their skin and fatigue gnawed at their limbs. The horizon remained empty. No lights, no passing ships. Only the vast expanse of the ocean stretching endlessly in every direction. Eventually, Dr. Alfred's grip began to weaken. His fingers, stiff and trembling, threatened to slip from the smooth wood. Barney shifted, reaching out just in time to grasp his father's wrist as he slid downward. He braced himself, pulling him up. It was clear that their strength was fading, and just when it seemed things couldn't get worse, the water beneath them stirred, a sudden violent shift. Then a shark emerged, striking directly with its jaws gaping before clamping down on Dr. Alfred's ankle. The force wrenched him backward. Barney heaved with all his strength, dragging his father onto the overturned boat just as the shark vanished into the abyss. The water swirled red, staining the sea with a deepening cloud of blood. Dr. Alfred lay sprawled across the hull, his breaths ragged. His ankle was torn, the flesh shredded down to the bone. The sea was no longer empty. Shapes moved beneath them, shadows slicing through the water, circling. The scent of blood had drawn them. The ocean's silence was broken by the sound of water breaking, the dull slap of fins, the gliding of unseen predators. Barney's pulse pounded as he gripped his father's arm. More sharks were coming. Then the second attack. A sudden surge, a splash. Barney turned just in time to see his father slip from the boat. The water erupted. A gaping mouth lined with rows of serrated teeth broke the surface. The shark's head, sleek and pale beneath the morning sun, lunged. Barney lunged too, his fingers grasping for his father's hand. For a moment he had him. Then another surge. Dr. Alfred disappeared beneath the thrashing waves. Barney scrambled, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The water frothed with movement. The sharks had descended upon their prey, tearing through the sea with frantic energy. A sharp, searing pain ripped through Barney's leg. He cried out, kicking violently. A set of powerful jaws had latched onto his ankle, dragging him downward. He struck out, his fist connecting with the creature's snout. A desperate blow. The grip loosened. The shark veered off, leaving behind a trail of crimson in the water. Barney gasped for air, his hands fumbling to regain his hold on the overturned boat. His breath came in short, desperate bursts. His leg throbbed, the water around him darkening with fresh blood. Then the blaring horn of a purseneer named Excellent cut through the chaos. The vessel loomed in the distance, its hull slicing through the turbulent sea. At the side of the ship, the sharks disappeared beneath the waves as swiftly as they had arrived. The crew moved fast, scanning the water as they approached. Just a few feet away from Barney, they spotted Dr. Alfred's lifeless body, partially submerged and drifting in the blood-stained waves. They lowered a rope ladder over the side, and strong hands reached down, pulling both Barney and his father aboard. On deck, Barney gasped for breath, his mind still reeling from the attack. Crew members listened as he recounted their harrowing ordeal before rushing him to Santa Catalina Island Hospital. There, doctors worked swiftly to treat Barney's injuries, closing the puncture wounds on his ankle. Meanwhile, his father remained unresponsive and was immediately taken to the intensive care unit. Despite their efforts, Dr. Alfred was pronounced dead. An autopsy later confirmed that he had drowned, his lungs filled with seawater before the sharks ever reached him. In the days that followed, the Coast Guard conducted an extensive search, scanning the waters between Santa Catalina Island and the mainland. They discovered the wreckage of the boat drifting miles from the attack site. Its stern and engine charred, the damage unmistakable. Investigators traced the explosion to a mechanical failure, likely caused by a leaking fuel line igniting when Dr. Alfred attempted to restart the engine. As for the shark attack, the species responsible remains a mystery. Some experts suggest a great white or a mako, while others believe it could have been a deep water predator, drawn closer to shore by changing ocean currents. The Catalina Channel's dark new reputation hung over the waters, a chilling reminder that no one was truly safe, not even a father and son. It was July 18th, 2015 off the coast of Florida, the kind of summer day that seemed endless. The Gulf of Mexico gleamed under a flawless sky, the surface still and brilliant, reflecting the sun like a mirror. For the Calloway family and their guest, the St. Jameses, this was meant to be the start of a perfect weekend, one filled with luxury, salt air, and memories captured against the backdrop of the open sea. Their yacht was named Coastal Serenity, an 85-foot Sunseeker Manhattan worth nearly $1 million. It featured 4 staterooms, leather interiors, twin jet skis, and a custom diving platform built into the stern. James Calloway, a real estate developer who had made his fortune transforming coastal land into luxury properties, considered the yacht a symbol of everything he had achieved. The boat was his retreat, his trophy, his escape from the deadlines and deals that defined his days. Owning a yacht wasn't just indulgence, it was proof of arrival. On board with James were his wife Eleanor, their 2 teenage children Madison and Tyler, and their friends Mark and Lisa St. James, along with their kids Michael and Lyra. The group had launched from their private dock in Naples early that morning. By midday, they'd reached a quiet cove 12 miles offshore known for calm waters and excellent visibility. The anchor dropped into 80-foot deep water and the yacht settled gently into place. The surface around them was almost unnaturally calm. Lunch was served on the aft deck. A chef had prepared grilled fish, tropical fruit, and icy drinks. Laughter rose from the table. The adults relaxed in the shade while the teenagers stretched out along the rails, talking and scrolling through their phones. A pod of dolphins passed in the distance, drawing a round of cheers and excited pointing. Everything felt cinematic, framed by light and ease. The entire scene played out like a postcard, a little too perfect, almost scripted. Lyra Calloway, 19, was quiet but never withdrawn. She had just finished her first year at Northwestern, where she was studying marine biology. Lyra had always been drawn to the water. It was where she felt most alive, most focused. She volunteered at aquariums, read about marine ecosystems, and often sketched sea life in the margins of her notebooks. She was observant and kind, someone who listened more than she spoke. She had not expected to be invited on a luxury yacht, but when Madison, her college roommate, extended the offer, Lyra had accepted without hesitation. This wasn't just a getaway, it was a glimpse into a life far removed from her own, and it was a chance to be closer to the ocean she loved. The teens changed into their swimsuits after lunch and headed toward the stern, excited to swim. The water was warm at 82 degrees and the visibility extended nearly 30 feet below. The custom diving platform gleamed under the sun. Madison jumped first, followed by Tyler, who made a dramatic splash. Michael stayed back with a waterproof camcorder filming the action. Lyra hesitated only briefly, then stepped onto the ledge and dove cleanly into the sea. She didn't perform or pose, just slipped below the surface like she belonged there. For the next 10 minutes, they rotated between climbing, jumping, and swimming just beyond the yacht. The water was crystal clear, the kind that felt impossible to leave. Fish darted around their ankles, the sun burned high overhead, glittering off the chop. The adults remained on deck, drinks in hand, occasionally glancing toward the water. The sea rocked gently, and there was a stillness to the air that almost felt too perfect. Nothing seemed wrong, nothing gave away what was just below them. The first impact came without warning. A deep thud struck the yacht's port side. Glasses tipped over and chairs shifted. For a moment, no one knew what had happened. Captain Rodriguez checked the control panel and confirmed they were anchored above 65 feet of open water. There were no reefs, no sandbars, just the ocean. A second, more powerful strike hit the stern. This time, the yacht lurched. The platform groaned as it shifted against the bolts. Tyler, who had been climbing the ladder, slipped and splashed backward into the sea. The sound echoed across the deck. Everyone turned toward the rear of the yacht. Then the fin surfaced. It was massive, slicing through the water in a wide arc. Beneath it, a dark shape moved with deliberate force. What emerged next was unmistakable: a great white shark, later estimated to be 18 feet long and nearly 4,000 pounds. It had been circling beneath them, likely drawn by the engine vibrations or erratic patterns of swimmers splashing just feet from the hull. Lyra was already swimming toward Tyler. He had drifted slightly from the others after his fall, and she reached him quickly, urging him toward the ladder. Michael climbed out of the water. Madison was halfway up. The rest of the group shouted from the deck, panic spreading across their faces. The shark circled once, then rammed the diving platform a third time. The strike was violent. A 3-foot gash opened below the waterline. Alarms rang from the control panel as seawater began to rush into the engine bay. Lyra and Tyler were still in the water. The shark passed under Tyler again, its rough skin slicing abrasions across his side. Then it turned sharply. It wasn't interested in him, its focus shifted. It closed in on Lyra. The force of the strike lifted her halfway out of the water. Blood erupted across the surface as she was pulled beneath in a sudden surge. For several seconds, there was nothing. No movement, no color, just silence. James dove in immediately. He swam hard toward the spot where Lyra had vanished. The water was darker now, cloudy with blood and bubbles. Then, somehow, she surfaced. She surfaced on her back, barely conscious, her leg torn open below the thigh. Tissue shredded, the joint limp, blood streaming in thick, pulsing clouds. Her body shook in small involuntary jerks, eyes half closed, lips parting in shallow, panicked gasps. She wasn't screaming, she didn't have the strength. They were just 15 feet from the ladder when the shark returned. It came in low, from beneath and behind, its massive body a shadow against the deep. With terrifying precision, it struck upward, ripping Lyra from James' grasp in a single brutal surge. The water detonated in a spray of blood and foam as she vanished beneath the surface. James dove immediately, heart pounding, lungs burning. But the sea had turned opaque, thick with blood and churn. He couldn't see anything, only the echo of thrashing, then silence. By the time he surfaced, gasping, the ocean had gone still again. The shark had disappeared into deeper water, retreating the way large predators often do after a kill, silent, efficient, and unseen. For a moment, there was nothing but the gentle lap of waves against the hull. Then, in the distance, something bobbed to the surface. Pale, motionless, a single arm drifting in the swell. The Coast Guard arrived 18 minutes after Rodriguez's flare. A rescue team located Lyra's body nearly a mile away. She had washed up on a stretch of sand, face down in the surf, her hair tangled in seaweed and her body torn in multiple places. She had been carried by the current, but not far enough to disappear. James was hospitalized with deep lacerations across his torso and arms. He received 87 stitches. Tyler, though physically unharmed beyond surface wounds, was unable to speak for days. At some point, the recording had stopped. No one asked to see the footage. That night, Michael took the camcorder from the table, removed the tape, and walked outside. He dropped it into the fire pit and left before the flames had fully caught. No one asked about it. The footage was never mentioned again. The yacht was hauled back to shore for repairs. The structural damage was extensive, but it was never restored. James sold it quietly within 3 months. Neither he nor Eleanor ever returned to the water. Marine biologists confirmed the attacker as a female great white. Some speculated the shark had been disoriented by shifting currents or driven closer to shore by warming waters. Others believed the vibrations of the anchored yacht might have triggered a territorial reaction. No one could say with certainty what caused the aggression. August 19, 2018 was warm and windless along Australia's northern coast. The sun hung low over Byron Bay, casting long shadows across the empty shoreline where red warning flags flapped idly in the breeze. A lifeguard truck sat locked behind the gates of a closed beach access road, and beyond it, clear signage read, "Beach closed. Shark sightings reported. No swimming." The warning had been in place for days, issued after multiple drone patrols recorded a large great white patrolling just offshore. But late that afternoon, 5 teenagers ducked under the gate and made their way down the sand, laughing, filming, and ignoring everything they'd been told. 17-year-old Liam Norwick had planned the moment all week. He wasn't a thrill-seeker in the traditional sense. He didn't skydive or surf, but he lived for the kind of content that turned heads on social media. His friends called him the main character, partly in jest, partly because Liam leaned into it. At school, he was the one narrating lunchtime stories with perfect comedic timing. Online, he'd film fake stunts, reaction videos, and clips of himself getting chased by public security guards. He wanted attention, and that afternoon he had a plan to get footage of himself swimming past the closed zone buoys, throw in some muscle flexing and jokes, and maybe go viral for pushing the rules. The group set up their phones in the sand just beyond the flagged zone. Liam stripped off his shirt, grinned for the camera, and waded into the surf with exaggerated flexes and mock bravado. He shouted something about not being scared of fish before diving through a shallow wave and surfacing a few yards out. One phone zoomed in, another captured behind-the-scenes commentary. None of them noticed the ripple near the second buoy. A few moments later, the water behind Liam exploded in a violent splash. His scream was sharp and short-lived, loud enough to startle the group into silence. Then he vanished. What no one had seen just beneath the surface was the strike of a great white shark. These apex predators are ambush hunters capable of reaching over 15 feet in length and weighing upwards of 2,000 pounds. Their bite force exceeds 4,000 pounds per square inch, enough to sever limbs or split a seal in two. In murky coastal waters like those near Byron Bay, they hunt by silhouette, tracking prey from below and launching upward with devastating speed. Drone footage from earlier that week had confirmed one patrolling the area, and the beach had been closed for a reason. It was a known hunting corridor, made even more dangerous by the splash, motion, and noise of a lone swimmer breaking the surface. At first, Liam's friends thought he was playing. The camera kept rolling, but when he didn't resurface, his closest friend sprinted into the water, yelling his name. What he found was a cloud of blood spreading in slow spirals and a strip of fabric, part of Liam's board shorts floating on the surface. Panic broke out. One boy ran toward the access road to get a signal and call for help. Another collapsed on the beach, screaming into his hands. Phones were dropped, voices cracked, and the laughter that had filled the air just minutes before was gone. Paramedics arrived 30 minutes later, but there was nothing left to do. The boys had pulled Liam back toward shore, but he had already lost too much blood. His leg had been severed at the hip. The great white had bitten once and vanished. Textbook behavior for a large shark mistaking prey. The medical report later confirmed what responders already knew. Liam had bled out within minutes of the attack. The location matched drone footage from earlier that week, confirming the presence of the same shark that had triggered the original beach closure. Despite the warnings, despite the signs, he jumped in anyway. Video from the day circulated briefly before being taken down. It wasn't graphic, it showed Liam flexing, swimming, laughing. But it captured the lead-up so clearly that investigators used it to piece together the timeline. Interviews with the group revealed the pattern. They knew the beach was closed, they thought the warning was overblown, and they never imagined something could go so wrong so quickly. The attack reignited national debate about digital culture, teenage risk-taking, and the growing trend of dangerous stunts staged for social media clout. A memorial was held at Liam's high school gymnasium the following Friday. Hundreds attended. Students, teachers, local families. His parents didn't speak, but his younger brother read from a list of things Liam had planned to do. Study abroad, start a clothing brand, get a tattoo their mom wouldn't approve of. Friends described him as funny, loyal, full of energy, and always looking for the next big moment. There was no villain to prosecute. The beach had been closed, the warnings were obvious, and the shark had acted as nature intended. What made it harder to accept was how avoidable it all was. Liam didn't die because of bad luck, he died because he made a reckless choice, ignoring every posted sign and every recent report for the sake of a stunt. It wasn't just a mistake, it was a chain of impulsive decisions that ended exactly the way experts warn they can. And now, his story is told as a reminder of what happens when thrill wins out over sense. July 12, 2014 dawned warm and bright over Port Douglas, Australia. The winter sun cast a golden glow over the coastline, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and eucalyptus through the air. Waves lapped lazily at the shore, their rhythmic murmur blending with the distant calls of seabirds. It was the kind of morning that invited families to the beach, promising nothing but calm waters and endless stretches of sand. Among those drawn to the coast that day was the Darug family, who had arrived after a 3-hour drive from Cairns, eager for a weekend of relaxation. At breakfast, 12-year-old Kira had been especially animated, talking about the marine life she hoped to see. She was enchanted by the ocean, hoping to spot sea stars in the tide pools, collect shimmering shells along the shore, and watch tiny fish dart between the waves. The water felt like a world of endless wonder, full of treasures waiting to be discovered. Kira Darug had always been fascinated by marine life. Born to Gerard Darug, a local high school biology teacher at Cairns State High School, and Akira Darug, a senior nurse in the emergency department at Cairns Hospital, Kira inherited her father's passion for science and her mother's caring nature. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of sea creatures, and she spent countless hours watching nature documentaries. She had recently won her school's science fair with a project about Great Barrier Reef conservation, and her teachers often remarked on her exceptional understanding of marine ecosystems. At 9:45 a.m., the Darugs arrived at 4 Mile Beach, claiming a spot near the northern end where the crowds were thinner. The temperature was a mild 75 degrees, typical for a winter morning in tropical Queensland. The family had been planning this trip for weeks, a celebration of Gerard's recent promotion to the head of the science department. Kira, wearing her favorite blue swimsuit with dolphin prints, could barely contain her excitement as she helped set up their beach shelter. Her younger brother Bindi, age 8, immediately began constructing an elaborate sandcastle system while their father arranged their picnic supplies. The water was unusually murky that morning, following 3 days of heavy rain that had washed away sediment from nearby rivers into the ocean. Such conditions created the perfect opportunity for an ambush predator, one that thrives in low visibility and shallow waters. Among the most feared of these hunters is the bull shark. Built for stealth and power, bull sharks take advantage of murky waters to strike unsuspecting prey with lethal precision. These formidable predators can grow up to 11.5 feet in length and weigh more than 500 pounds. Unlike most sharks, they have a remarkable ability to survive in both salt and fresh water, venturing far up rivers and into brackish environments. Their aggressive nature and tendency to prowl in areas where humans often swim have made them responsible for more attacks on people than almost any other shark species. At 10:19 a.m., the peaceful morning shattered. Kira had ventured about 30 feet from the shore, still well within the designated swimming area, when she spotted something struggling in the water ahead. A seabird, its wings pinned awkwardly against its body, bobbing weakly in the gentle surf. Even from a distance, she could see the thin tangle of fishing line wrapped around its legs and wings, leaving it half drowned, unable to fly. She swam toward it, arms cutting smoothly through the water. The bird thrashed at her approach, but exhaustion had taken its toll. She reached for it, hands carefully moving toward the tangled line. A bull shark had been circling below, its attention locked onto the struggling bird. Injured prey was an easy meal, and the predator had been waiting for the right moment to strike. But before it could, another figure entered its territory, moving with purpose, disrupting the pattern of the hunt. The shark, opportunistic by nature, redirected its focus. Without warning, the water around Kira erupted. The 8-foot bull shark struck from below, its powerful jaws clamping onto her right leg with devastating force. The initial bite, delivering 1,250 pounds per square inch of pressure, shattered her femur instantly and severed major arteries. The impact knocked her sideways, and before she could react, the shark thrashed violently, dragging her underwater. For several agonizing seconds, she disappeared beneath the surface, the water above turning dark with blood. Then, just as quickly as it had begun, the shark released her, its instincts satisfied by the damage already done. Kira surfaced, her body limp, face pale, her hands still partially outstretched toward the bird, which had managed to free itself in the chaos. David Cooper, a 42-year-old off-duty lifeguard with 15 years of experience, was jogging along the beach when he heard the commotion. Panicked screams, the unmistakable churn of something thrashing in the water. He sprinted toward the shoreline where Jara Darug was already moving through the surf toward his daughter. Together they plunged into the bloodied water. The shark circled back, its massive dorsal fin cutting through the surface as it made a second pass. Cooper moved between the predator and Kira while Jara pulled her toward shore. The water around them had turned crimson, spreading rapidly. Once on the sand, Jara applied pressure to Kira's leg, working to slow the bleeding. Her skin was cool, her breathing shallow. A bystander had already called for emergency services, and by 10:25 a.m., paramedics Mark Stevens and Julie Wong arrived on scene. They assessed her condition. Hypovolemic shock, a weak and thready pulse, extensive tissue damage extending from her nearly severed right leg to her hip. Despite the severity of her injuries, Kira remained conscious as the paramedics worked to stabilize her. A rescue helicopter landed directly on the beach at 10:43 a.m. During the 8-minute flight to Canes Hospital, Kira received 4 units of blood as paramedics fought to keep her alive. A trauma team led by Dr. Richard Barnes was waiting in the emergency department, where Kira was immediately rushed into surgery. For 16 grueling hours, medical teams worked in shifts to save Kira's life. The initial surgery lasted 7 hours as doctors attempted to repair the massive trauma to her leg. The shark's serrated teeth had caused extensive damage to her muscle tissue, and the force of the bite had shattered her femur into multiple fragments. Despite multiple blood transfusions and the doctor's best efforts, infection began setting in, leading to severe sepsis. At 2:17 a.m. on July 13th, Kira Darug's heart stopped for the final time. The medical team attempted resuscitation for 23 minutes before pronouncing her dead. Her parents, who had maintained their vigil outside the operating room, were devastated. Jara, who had spent his career saving lives, now found himself helpless in the face of his own daughter's loss. His wife collapsed against him, her silent sobs shaking them both as the weight of the moment settled in. In her final moments, Kira's small hand clung weakly to her father's as he whispered reassurance she was too tired to answer. Her eyelids fluttered, her breath shallow as the world around her faded. Her parents would always remember the way she looked that day, so full of life in the morning sun, laughing as she ran toward the waves, never imagining that it would be the last time. The tragedy sent ripples through the community. 4 Mile Beach, once a place of carefree enjoyment, became a site of cautious remembrance. Authorities increased shark monitoring and installed new warning systems aiming to prevent another loss like Kira's. Local surfers and swimmers spoke in hushed voices of the girl who had loved the sea and had, in the end, been claimed by it. Today, a small plaque stands near the spot where Kira took her final swim. Worn by salt and wind, its message remains clear, a solemn reminder that the ocean, for all its beauty, is still untamed. It was 1967 in Sydney, Australia. A group of friends set out for what was supposed to be a fun and relaxing day. There were 4 of them in total, 3 adults and 1 child packed into a car, cruising along the coastline, enjoying the scenic drive. The road took them through Dover Heights, an eastern suburb of Sydney known for its breathtaking cliffs that towered over the Pacific Ocean. But on this particular day, those views were obscured by thick autumn fog that rolled in from the sea, turning the drive into something far more dangerous. The mist hung heavy, shrouding the road ahead, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of the car. Still, they pressed on, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. As they made their way along the winding cliffside roads, the child in the back seat began to fidget. He had dropped something onto the floor and couldn't reach it. Frustrated, he started to cry, his small voice cutting through the muffled quiet of the foggy morning. The driver, trying to soothe him, made a split-second mistake. He reached back to grab the item without stopping the car. His hands fumbled in the footwell. His attention diverted from the road just long enough for disaster to strike. By the time he realized he had veered too far to the left, it was already too late. The tires screeched as he slammed the brakes, but momentum carried the car forward. It crashed through the metal safety barrier, shattering it into pieces. The vehicle shot through the air, the passengers screaming as gravity took hold. The car didn't fall directly into the sea, not at first. Instead, it smashed into jagged rocks jutting out from the cliff face, coming to a sickening halt in a near vertical position. It dangled precariously, its front end tilting downward toward the waves far below. The violent impact threw the front passenger forward with incredible force, sending her hurtling straight through the windshield. She plummeted 100 feet, her body spinning through the air before slamming into the ocean. The moment she hit the water, she didn't move. The impact alone may have been enough to take her life, but even if she had survived the fall, she would never make it back to shore. Within moments, the ocean around her darkened as sleek, shadowy shapes rushed toward her. The splash had drawn them in, and the scent of fresh blood sealed her fate. A frenzy erupted in the water as 14 sharks swarmed her lifeless body, tearing into her with unrelenting savagery. From the precarious wreckage above, the driver watched in horror. The once serene water had turned into a bubbling, thrashing mass of fins, tails, and teeth. The ocean turned red as the woman's body disappeared beneath the chaos. His stomach clenched with fear as he turned his attention to the rest of the passengers. He tried to look over his shoulder, but his seatbelt held him firmly in place. He struggled against it, desperate to move, to check if the others were alive. The car groaned under its own weight, the metal frame creaking with every slight movement. It swayed on the rocks, clinging on by mere inches. The driver barely dared to breathe, afraid that even the smallest shift would send them all tumbling into the sea. When he finally managed to glance behind him, his heart sank. The child and the other passenger were completely still. He called out their names, his voice hoarse with desperation, but there was no response. He didn't know if they were unconscious or worse, but he knew one thing: if they didn't get out soon, none of them would make it out alive. People gathered at the cliff's edge, horrified at the sight of the teetering vehicle. Emergency services were on their way, but time was slipping away with each agonizing second. Inside the car, the driver was barely holding on. Blood seeped from the deep gash on his forehead, trickling down his face and into his eyes. His vision was blurry, his head throbbing with sharp, relentless pain. Every breath felt shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears like a war drum. His hands trembled as he tried to steady himself, but terror had its grip on him. The car groaned and creaked under its own weight, shifting slightly with every tiny movement. He barely dared to breathe, praying the rocks would hold. But after 30 agonizing minutes, the inevitable happened. The jagged rocks beneath the car finally crumbled. The car lurched violently, then plunged downward. The man barely had time to scream before he was weightless, tumbling through the air. The vehicle flipped as it fell, slamming against the rocky cliffside before smashing into the water below. The impact was bone-rattling. For a brief moment, the car floated, bobbing like a buoy, but the damage had already been done. Water rushed in from all sides. The man, still strapped into his seat, gasped as the icy current surged around his legs. He clawed at his seatbelt, frantically trying to unclip it, but it wouldn't budge. The cold stole his breath, and panic set in as the water level rose, creeping up his chest, then his neck. Then, just outside the shattered windshield, something moved. A shadow, long and sleek, glided through the water. Then another, a flash of gray, a fin, then another. The man's stomach twisted in sheer horror. The sharks had returned. Drawn by the scent of blood, they had gathered in numbers, circling the sinking wreckage like vultures over a fresh carcass. He knew that if he didn't get out now, he would drown, or worse, be devoured alive. The thrashing sounds behind him made his blood run cold. He turned just in time to see the sharks forcing their way into the broken back windows, their powerful bodies wedging through the wreckage. They were going for the unconscious passengers. The sight sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He had to act now. With one last desperate yank, he loosened the seatbelt and freed himself. The car was sinking fast, and soon there would be no escape. He pressed himself against the roof of the car, took one deep, desperate breath, and plunged underwater. Darkness surrounded him. The murky water blurred his vision, but he could make out the massive shapes moving all around him. Sharks circling, waiting. He stayed as still as possible, clinging to the hope that they wouldn't notice him in the chaos of the sinking wreckage. His lungs burned as he scanned for a way out. The windscreen was his only option. He pushed off the seat and kicked forward, propelling himself through the gaping hole where the windshield had once been. As he swam, the water around him clouded red. His wound. The moment his blood diffused into the sea, the sharks turned their attention. Their movements changed, faster, more deliberate. One darted toward him. He twisted, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws, and forced himself to the surface. Breaking through the water, he gasped for air and immediately scrambled onto the car's roof. His hands slipped on the wet metal, but he managed to haul himself up, his chest heaving. He barely had a moment to collect himself before he saw the dorsal fins closing in from all directions. He wiped the blood from his face and turned his gaze toward the shore. It was so close, but the sea between him and safety was filled with death. Then he heard it, the deep, guttural sounds of the sharks as they reached the back seat. The feeding frenzy had begun. The wreckage shook violently as tails slapped the water and bodies twisted through the broken windows. The car, groaning under the pressure, tilted downward. He had seconds to decide. Stay and sink with it or dive into the water and risk everything. There was no time to hesitate. If he waited any longer, he knew there would be nothing left of him. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he leapt from the roof of the sinking car, propelling himself toward the shoreline. The distance was short, but to him it might as well have been miles. He knew the sharks would sense his movement, that any second a powerful jaw could clamp down on his leg and drag him under. But there was no other choice. He had to keep going. His arms carved through the water, his legs kicking furiously, every stroke bringing him closer to survival. The seconds stretched, each one filled with the unbearable tension of waiting for the inevitable attack. His lungs screamed for air, his muscles burned with exhaustion, and still he pushed forward. He braced himself, expecting the sudden searing pain of teeth sinking into his flesh. Any moment now, the pull of a predator's grip, the violent thrashing of death. But somehow, miraculously, it never came. His fingers scraped against rock, and he latched on, hauling himself onto the jagged shoreline. Coughing, shaking, barely able to believe he had made it, he turned just in time to see the car disappear beneath the surface. The sea swallowed it whole, leaving behind only ripples and red-tinged foam. Below, the sharks remained in a frenzy, their sleek bodies twisting and churning as they followed the car into the depths. Even as the wreck vanished, the water roiled with their frenzied movements. When emergency services finally reached him, the man was rushed to the hospital, barely able to process the horror he had just survived. His injuries were severe. A deep wound to his head, a strained neck, and the numbing grip of shock that would not release him for days. But he lived. He was the only one who did. His survival, however, came at a devastating cost. His friends were gone, taken in a brutal and merciless attack that no one could have foreseen. The horror of that day would haunt him forever, a nightmare that played on a loop in his mind. Over the years, Sydney Harbor had been the site of numerous shark attacks, its dark waters home to predators that ruled the depths. The exact species responsible for the attack was never confirmed, though experts suspected it was the work of bull sharks, one of the few species known to hunt in coordinated groups. It was 1951 and Corfu Island, a jewel of the Ionian Sea, still bore the charm of a quieter, less crowded time. The scent of saltwater clung to the air as tourists basked in the warm Mediterranean sun, unaware of the looming dangers hidden beneath the turquoise waters. Corfu had become known for its sparkling blue beaches, catamaran rides, and picturesque landscapes. The island's main industry was tourism, though it was far from the bustling hotspot it would later become. To locals like Vanda Puris, it was simply home, a place where the beauty of the land was woven into everyday life. Vanda had grown up amidst the familiar sights of rolling farmlands and the rhythmic sounds of the sea. Her world had always been sparkling beaches and the scent of ripe oranges, thanks to her family's small holding where they grew oranges. As the daughter of a humble farmer, her weekends were spent working the land. When Vanda turned 16 earlier that week, her parents, recognizing how hard she worked, gave her a rare treat: spending money and a weekend off to enjoy with her friends. They believed she would be at the beach with her girlfriends, as girls her age often did. But Vanda had other plans. Instead of meeting her friends at the crowded tourist beaches, Vanda was with George Athanasenas, a handsome senior from school. For the past 2 months, the two had been secretly courting, their relationship growing in quiet moments. Vanda had been swept away by George's charm, but she had kept their relationship a secret from her deeply religious Orthodox Christian father, knowing he would never approve. George wasn't just any boy, he was the one everyone admired, but he had eyes only for Vanda. She was smart, kind, and captivating to him. Though he hadn't said it yet, George already planned to marry her someday. That day, George insisted on paying for everything. He bought them sodas for their journey, and the two of them set off toward a secluded alcove that George knew well, an outcrop far from the crowds of tourists that usually flocked to the more popular beaches. They thought they were alone, but when they arrived, the beach was far from empty. A pair of wrinkled German retirees were soaking up the sun, a couple with 3 young children were splashing in the shallow waters, and a lone man drifted lazily in a small canoe. It wasn't the solitude they had hoped for, but they shrugged it off and headed into the water. They waded in together, the cool sea lapping at their legs as they swam out, far enough that their feet could no longer touch the ground. It was here, chest deep in the water, that the two of them found their peace. The world and its distractions seemed far away. They talked and laughed, their voices mingling with the gentle splashing of the waves. Vanda told George about her dream of studying nursing after school. She wondered aloud if her parents could afford to send her to medical school. George listened intently, nodding along, his attention fully on her. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the world was theirs alone. But then, something changed. George's eyes flicked to the horizon, his body tensing. He had seen something. He grabbed Vanda's arm, instinctively pulling her toward him. Vanda turned sharply, ready to question his actions, but George was already laughing, embarrassed by his overreaction. He pointed out at the water, dismissing it as nothing more than a dolphin. He had seen them plenty of times while out on his father's fishing boat. He shook his head, trying to brush off the instinctual fear. But Vanda was already intrigued, drawn in by the thought of dolphins so close. With excitement in her eyes, Vanda turned toward the open sea, scanning the waterline for any sign of the playful creatures. But it wasn't dolphins that she saw. The dark shape was far too large, moving too slowly, and far too ominous. It was a great white shark. The shark, nearly 18 feet long, had been skimming the waters for hours unnoticed by the beachgoers. The children had already left the water, but now, as if responding to a change in its surroundings, it moved closer, circling George and Vanda with precision. Its movements were smooth and deliberate, blending with the ripples, making it nearly impossible to detect. It had already passed by the area where the children had been playing and was now closing in on the two swimmers. The water shifted around them as the creature moved. George noted the change and told Vanda they should head back to shore, uncertain of what was nearby. At that moment, a Coast Guard vessel appeared in the alcove, its presence altering the scene. The crew had seen the disturbance from afar and moved in to assist. Vanda, still expecting to see dolphins, agreed and started for the shore, unaware of what was approaching. The shark, sensing movement, decided it was time to strike. It had been circling for too long, waiting for the right moment to attack. As Vanda swam, her head down in a freestyle stroke, the shark surged forward, its massive body rising from the depths. In an instant, the water around her seemed to boil as the creature lunged. Vanda never saw it coming. Her head and shoulders were swallowed whole by the shark's gaping maw. The force of the bite was so powerful, so final, that it severed her cleanly in half just below the rib cage. The water turned crimson as the shark's jaw snapped shut, inhaling the upper half of her body. George's eyes widened in horror as he saw her disappear. He flung himself toward her, grabbing the legs that were all that remained. He tried to pull her back, but it was too late. In his hands, he held only her severed legs. The water around them bloomed with blood, and bits of her entrails drifted away on the current. The shark was far from done. Before George could grasp the magnitude of the loss, the shark struck him with the force of an aquatic cannonball. The impact sent him tumbling through the water, his ribs cracking under the blow as sharp pain radiated through his chest. But the predator wasn't after George, it had one last thing to claim: Vanda. As the beast knocked him off balance, George lost his grip on her remains and was pulled under by the current, disoriented and gasping for air. Suddenly, George felt something grab him by the hair. He flailed wildly, but it wasn't the shark. It was Mr. Peroni, the captain of the Coast Guard vessel. The crew had seen the chaos unfolding and raced to the scene, their eyes scanning the bloody water for any signs of life. Peroni's hand, grim and sure, clutched the only thing moving in the water: George's dark hair. With one powerful tug, the captain hauled George aboard the vessel. The boy was in a state of shock, his ribs shattered, his body battered. But the horror of what he had witnessed had broken him more than his injuries ever could. He was barely conscious as the crew rushed him to the hospital. But George would never be the same. Vanda, meanwhile, was gone. The ocean had claimed her with such speed that no one had even seen it coming. Her body was nothing but scattered fragments, torn and consumed by the creature that had lurked in the deep. The only remains were a small piece of intestine floating lazily on the surface of the water, a grim reminder of the girl who had been there just moments before. Following the incident, the Coast Guard scoured the waters, scanning for any sign of the predator. They caught a brief glimpse of a single fin cutting through the waves before it disappeared into the depths. The shark was gone, its hunger momentarily sated. In the days that followed, George was a broken shell. His ribs healed, but his mind couldn't forget the image of Vanda disappearing beneath the surface. He was sedated for much of the time, his grief too raw to comprehend. Back in the coastal town, Mr. Pieris, Vanda's father, was notified of the shark attack and called to the hospital as her next of kin. He arrived to check on George, who was admitted with 4 broken ribs and severe shock. Mr. Pieris had secretly known about the relationship between Vanda and George, but had hoped for the chance to meet them together as a couple. With her death, that opportunity was lost forever. Mr. Pieris sat silently by George's bedside, his heart heavy with grief. When George was well enough, he wheeled him to the memorial at the church. Though there was no body to bury, Vanda had been claimed by the sea, and all that remained was the sorrow of a community mourning its loss. It was June 14, 1959. The morning sky over La Jolla Cove was a patchwork of clouds, gray and heavy, with the occasional break of sunlight shimmering on the water's surface. Robert Pamperin stood by his kitchen window studying the horizon. The weather was less than ideal. The ocean reflected the dull sky above, but Robert and his friend Gerald had been planning this trip for weeks. Nothing short of a storm would deter them. The plan was straightforward: hunt for abalone off Alligator Head. Abalones were prized for their tender flesh and lustrous shells, fetching high prices in markets and restaurants. These large mollusks, native to cold waters along the Pacific coast of North America, were a delicacy. Harvesting them wasn't easy. Abalones clung tightly to rocks and preferred hiding in dark crevices during the day. Robert and Gerald knew the challenges, but they hoped their efforts would lead to a worthwhile haul. By mid-afternoon, Robert and Gerald, accompanied by their girlfriends, arrived at La Jolla Cove. The beach, as always, was busy with families and swimmers. The girlfriends found a small patch of sand near the rocky tide pools where Robert and Gerald began readying their gear. Robert carried blue swim fins, a black mask, gloves, and an abalone iron with a yellow handle. Attached to an inner tube, a burlap sack would hold their catch. The two men inspected their equipment with the precision born of habit. Freediving required minimal gear but demanded stamina and skill. Robert knew the risks well. Any experienced diver did. But the waters near La Jolla Cove had a reputation for safety. There had never been a fatal shark attack in the area, and the allure of the hunt outweighed any lurking concerns. By 5 p.m., with the tide beginning to rise, Robert and Gerald waded into the water near Alligator Head. The cool waves broke against their legs as they adjusted their masks and dove below the surface. Visibility was poor, no more than 20 feet, and the muted light gave the rocky seabed a shadowy cast. They moved methodically, diving and surfacing in turn, searching for abalones clinging to rocks. Each dive brought up more shells, their sacks growing heavier with the rewards of their labor. Unbeknownst to them, the water had become a perfect hunting ground, not just for the two friends, but for something far more dangerous. Earlier that day, divers had speared yellowtail fish nearby, leaving vibrations and traces of blood that could attract predators. A U.S. Navy sailor had also suffered a deep laceration on the rocks, his blood spilling into the water. Adding to the danger, a dead whale carcass had washed ashore less than 3,300 feet away the night before. Its fluids, carried by currents, created a scent trail that could lure large sharks from far away. The swell began to push the two men apart. They drifted farther with each dive until a gap of 30 to 50 feet separated them. Neither thought much of it. Both were confident swimmers and their focus remained on the hunt. It happened without warning. Beneath Robert, a dark outline of a great white shark emerged from the depths. At over 20 feet long, it was an anomaly for these waters, drawn by the scent and vibrations of the day's earlier activity. The shark surged upward, jaws wide, striking Robert with a force that churned the water red. Robert's scream pierced the air, a single desperate cry that startled Gerald. He turned in time to see his friend lifted out of the water, the shark clamped around his lower body. At first, Gerald thought it might be a cramp or a rogue wave, but the crimson stain spreading through the water told a more horrifying story. Gerald swam toward the commotion, his mind struggling to process the scene. Robert thrashed, his arms flailing as he tried to free himself. The shark shook its massive head, tearing deeper into its prey. Gerald dove beneath the surface, hoping to help, but the predator's size and power were overwhelming. It was no use. The shark dragged Robert into deeper waters, leaving only a spreading stain of blood in its wake. Panic overtook Gerald. He surfaced gasping for air and swam frantically toward the shore. His shouts drew the attention of lifeguards, who quickly organized a search. 10 experienced divers entered the water, combing the area for any sign of Robert, but found nothing. On the beach, their girlfriends stood in total shock, devastated by what was happening. As night fell, the search was called off, and the ocean remained silent about what had transpired beneath its surface. The next day, a swim fin washed ashore, its edges marked by jagged tears. The initials RP were carved into the rubber, a grim confirmation of Robert's fate. Witnesses, including a man perched on a nearby rock, corroborated Gerald's account. A great white shark had attacked Robert. Yet, some in the community clung to the notion of a killer whale, unwilling to believe such a predator could lurk so close to their cherished cove. Speculation about the attack's causes ran rampant. Investigators pieced together a series of events: the speared yellowtail, the sailor's bleeding wound, the nearby harbor seals, and the drifting whale carcass. Each factor played a role in drawing the shark into waters where such creatures were rarely seen. Over a year later, in November 1960, a skeleton was discovered at the bottom of a submarine canyon, 2,130 feet offshore. The coroner identified the remains as Robert's, bringing a semblance of closure to his family. July 15, 2010 dawned bright and clear over the waters of Jupiter, Florida. The air was warm with the scent of salt, and the ocean stretched out in an endless expanse of deep blue. Gentle waves lapped against the shore as early morning beachgoers staked out their spots, spreading towels and planting umbrellas in the sand. Just offshore, fishing boats bobbed in the distance, and seabirds wheeled overhead, scanning for their morning meal. None of them could have imagined that a few miles away, beneath the surface of the calm waters, something ancient and lethal was watching. Rebecca Hayes, 32, had always been drawn to the ocean. Growing up in coastal Maine, she spent her childhood exploring tide pools, braving frigid Atlantic waters, and competing in long-distance swimming events. Her passion for the sea led her to the University of Miami, where she earned a degree in marine biology in 2000. But for Rebecca, studying the ocean wasn't enough. She needed to be in it, surrounded by the water she loved. An accomplished open water swimmer, she competed in endurance races worldwide, pushing her body to its limits. Her friends admired her fearless nature, her relentless determination. Some, however, worried that she was a little too confident when it came to the risks of the open ocean. That morning, she prepared for another long-distance swim, a routine training session in familiar waters. It was just another day, another challenge. But no amount of experience could account for what lurked unseen beneath the waves. The great white shark is one of the ocean's most fearsome predators, a species that has roamed Earth's waters for over 400 million years. Growing over 20 feet long and weighing as much as 5,000 pounds, these sharks possess an almost unmatched predatory efficiency. Their torpedo-shaped bodies allow them to accelerate with terrifying speed, while their serrated 3-inch-long teeth can shear through flesh and bone with devastating force. Despite their reputation, fatal great white attacks on humans are relatively rare. Most encounters are believed to be cases of mistaken identity, where a shark confuses a swimmer or surfer for its usual prey, seals or sea lions. When a great white does attack, however, the results are often catastrophic. For experienced swimmers like Rebecca, the possibility of encountering a shark was always in the back of her mind, but it was not enough to deter her. Confident in her abilities and aware of the precautions taken during open water training, she approached the ocean with the same fearless determination that had defined her career. That morning, she set out just after sunrise, accompanied by her longtime friend and training partner, 28-year-old Michael Torres. He piloted the support boat alongside her, maintaining a steady pace as she glided through the water. Conditions were near perfect: calm seas, clear skies, and the water temperatures hovering at a comfortable 78 degrees. By 8:17 a.m., Rebecca had reached the planned training zone 3 miles offshore. The water's clarity extended nearly 100 feet in all directions, offering an unobstructed view of the vast empty blue. Michael followed her progress from the boat, keeping a careful eye on her steady strokes as she powered through the waves. For 30 minutes, everything was routine. Then, at 8:47 a.m., something shifted. A dark shape emerged from the depths, an immense, shadowy figure moving with the eerie silence of an apex predator. Without warning, the water beneath Rebecca erupted. The 18-foot great white struck with explosive force, launching Rebecca partially out of the water. The impact alone was enough to break ribs and puncture organs. Before she could react, before she could even register what had happened, the shark's massive jaws clamped down. Michael saw it all from the boat. One moment Rebecca was swimming, the next she was airborne. Her body twisted at an unnatural angle as the shark's teeth sank into her torso. The force of the bite was beyond comprehension. Nearly 4,000 pounds per square inch, more than enough to sever limbs and crush bone. The water turned red in an instant. Rebecca's scream was brief, a single sharp cry swallowed by the ocean. The shark, displaying its natural feeding instincts, began thrashing its head side to side, ripping through flesh and muscle. Within seconds, Rebecca was gone. Michael could only watch as the great white disappeared beneath the surface, dragging what remained of his friend into the deep. The Coast Guard arrived at 9:22 a.m., responding to Michael's frantic distress call. A search was launched, but the only trace of Rebecca ever recovered was her torn wetsuit and a single swim fin floating near the attack site. For 3 days, teams scoured the waters, though by the second day the mission had shifted from a rescue effort to a recovery operation. After obtaining Rebecca's information from Michael, authorities contacted her parents, Robert and Linda Hayes, at their home in Maine. The call came as a shock. Rebecca had swum in open waters for years, and the idea that she was simply gone felt impossible. Within hours, they were on a flight to Florida, desperate for answers. At the marina, they watched each search boat return, hoping for any sign of their daughter. Volunteers joined the efforts, combing the shoreline for debris, while Rebecca's friends from the open water swimming community called in, offering support. But with each passing day, the weight of reality settled heavier. She wasn't coming back. On July 19th, commercial fisherman Frank Martinez and his crew were out on the water 20 miles south of the attack site when something caught his attention. A massive great white shark, its sleek body cutting effortlessly through the waves, swam close to the boat. As it passed, Martinez noticed a deep, jagged scar running along its left gill slit, a distinctive marking he had heard about just days earlier. Local authorities had put out a call to fishermen, dive operators, and boat captains in the area, alerting them to be on the lookout for a large great white with a unique scarring pattern. The description matched reports given by Michael Torres, who had seen the unique pattern on the shark during the attack. Martinez immediately contacted authorities, reporting the sighting and giving precise coordinates before the shark disappeared into deeper waters. Marine officials already monitoring the area deployed tracking teams using aerial surveillance and patrol boats. Over the next 2 days, they followed the shark's movements, eventually locating it near a deep-water shelf where large predators often hunt. Believing this was the same shark responsible for Rebecca's death, they made the decision to capture and examine it. When the shark was dissected, what they found left no doubt. Inside its stomach were human remains, fragments of bone, and a shredded section of Rebecca's wetsuit. Michael, the sole witness to Rebecca's death, was deeply shaken and withdrew from open water swimming. In the aftermath, he abandoned the sport entirely, unable to return to the water without remembering what had happened. Her family was devastated. The loss of their daughter left a void that could never be filled, and in the months that followed, they struggled to come to terms with the horrific way she had died. The ocean, once a place of adventure and joy for Rebecca, became something they could no longer look at without pain. July 16, 2016 was heavy and hot off the coast of Key West, Florida. The air sat thick over the ocean, turning the sea surface into a glassy mirror that reflected the moonlight in long, broken strips. A private catamaran floated quietly just beyond the reef line, anchored in a feeding channel known to local captains as a place to avoid after dark. Here, in the deeper cuts between sandbars and limestone shelves, the tides pushed bait fish through narrow passages, bringing larger predators with them. Beneath the calm surface, the current churned with activity, and above, on the deck of a rented party boat, no one was thinking about what swam below. Tyler Grimshaw was 27 and restless, the kind of person who always needed movement. He worked odd jobs around Tampa: construction, seasonal landscaping, sometimes delivery driving, but rarely stayed in one role for long. He liked people, attention, and adventure, especially the kind that involved pushing limits. His friends called him fearless. Others might have called him impulsive. He was athletic, outgoing, and known for taking risks that made everyone nervous but usually ended in laughter. He didn't have a death wish, he just didn't believe anything bad would happen. The boat had been rented to celebrate a friend's birthday with nearly 20 guests on board. As night fell, music played from a small speaker, red plastic cups lined the railing, and the catamaran glowed under deck lights that cut sharp edges across the water. It was meant to be a night of drinking and dancing beneath the stars. Most of the guests stayed close to the center of the boat, barefoot and relaxed, enjoying the breeze and the open air. Tyler, however, wasn't the type to stay on the sidelines. He'd been drinking heavily for hours, bouncing between groups, louder and more animated with each passing hour. The waters around Key West are rich with marine life, but certain deep channels beyond the reef are known danger zones. Transition points between shallow flats and deeper hunting grounds where predators thrive. Few are more suited to these murky, brackish waters than the bull shark, large, territorial, and highly aggressive. Unlike great whites or tiger sharks, bull sharks can tolerate fresh water and hunt with precision in low visibility. Measuring up to 11 feet and weighing over 500 pounds, they strike with over 1,300 pounds of bite force. Fast, relentless, and easily triggered by the splash and thrash of a human in the dark. Just before 10 p.m., Tyler climbed up onto the guardrail, arms wide, and dove headfirst into the dark. The music kept playing. A few people laughed, others panicked. The water swallowed him in an instant, and for a few moments he was visible, treading water, backstroking, calling out as he swam just beyond the reach of the deck lights. People shouted for him to come back. Some moved toward the edge of the boat, trying to spot him in the dark. But Tyler kept swimming deeper into the shadows. Then something changed. A sharp splash echoed from the far side of the boat, followed by a single sharp cry. It was short, abrupt, and loud enough to make the music seem suddenly distant. When the spotlight swept the water, Tyler was gone. There was no sign of struggle, no flailing limbs, no second scream. Just a swirl in the water and a torn piece of fabric that floated up seconds later. One of Tyler's friends, sober enough to act, grabbed a phone and called the Coast Guard. On deck, the captain pulled the boat away from the spreading blood as guests shouted Tyler's name into the dark, scanning the waves with flashlights. No one jumped in. The water was too black, too still. For nearly 20 minutes they searched, circling the deck, tossing life rings, sweeping the surface with spotlights. But Tyler was gone. Rescue boats launched from shore with helicopters overhead within the hour. Divers entered before dawn using floodlights and sonar to comb the seabed. The crew gave detailed statements about the timing and location, but by the next afternoon, only a sneaker and a torn strip of shirt had been found. Blood in the water confirmed what officials already suspected. Tyler had likely been taken by a bull shark, drawn to the sound and thrashing in a known feeding corridor. His body was never recovered. The shark was never identified or pursued. Tyler's death stunned his family and friends. A memorial was held in Tampa that weekend, with a collage of photos displayed near a folded t-shirt and an untouched drink from the party that never ended. The service was quiet. Some were angry, most were just bewildered. Tyler had always seemed invincible until he wasn't. The reality was hard to ignore. He made a reckless choice, diving into predator-filled waters at night while drunk, ignoring every warning from the people around him. It was a clear, sunny day when Jeffrey Brazier steered the Matrix, an 80-foot catamaran, into the turquoise waters off Pelican Island. On board were 12 passengers, eager to experience the untouched beauty of Australia's western coastline. For Jeffrey, this day marked another step toward realizing his dream of making a living from the ocean, a passion he had held since childhood. He had been introduced to the sea before he could walk, spending his early years on boats with his parents. Growing up, his love for surfing, diving, and sailing deepened, but he wasn't sure how to turn it into a career. When Matrix Ocean Adventures hired him as a first mate, it felt like fate. Recently, the original skipper had stepped down, and Jeffrey was offered the chance to take the helm for the Matrix's maiden voyage. He accepted the challenge with quiet pride, determined to prove himself. The Matrix was a luxury catamaran, 80 feet long with 6 private cabins, a spacious deck, and modern amenities. The 13-day journey began in Perth, following the rugged coastline all the way to Broome. Along the way, the passengers enjoyed secluded bays, snorkeling in crystal-clear waters, and breathtaking scenery that Jeffrey knew well. On this day, they had reached the southeast corner of Pelican Island, a spot known as Wreck Point. It was early afternoon and the group had just finished lunch. Jeffrey carefully maneuvered the catamaran into position and dropped anchor. The Abrolhos Islands, famous for their vibrant coral reefs and marine life, lay beneath the water's surface. Parrotfish, wrasses, and groupers darted through the corals, while sea turtles grazed lazily. The drop-off, where the shallow reef gave way to the deep blue, was a favorite snorkeling spot. Jeffrey handed out masks and snorkels, explaining the underwater wonders. The passengers, eager and excited, prepared to enter the water. Jeffrey joined them, lowering himself into the warm, clear sea. As Jeffrey swam, the underwater world unfolded before him. Fish shimmered in the sunlight, weaving through vibrant coral formations. Sea anemones swayed gently, their tentacles dancing with the rhythm of the ocean. Near the edge of the drop-off, Jeffrey spotted a large sea turtle grazing on the coral. He waved to Rod Plug, one of the passengers nearby, signaling for him to take a closer look. Rod started toward Jeffrey but noticed water leaking into his mask. He stopped to adjust it, using a standard diver's hand signal to indicate he was heading back to the boat. Jeffrey glanced up briefly and saw the gesture, acknowledging it with a quick wave before turning his focus back to the reef, unaware of the dark shadow rising from the depths below. As Rod swam toward the Matrix, he tightened his mask, adjusting it against his face. The peaceful silence of the ocean surrounded him, until a sudden splash behind him shattered the stillness. Startled, he turned just in time to see the water churn violently. In an instant, a massive shark, jaws wide open, surged upward and slammed into Jeffrey. The shark was estimated to be around 20 feet long. Eyewitnesses later described it as having a dark back and pale underside with a dorsal fin about 3 feet high. With incredible force, the shark's bite severed Jeffrey's body in two. Blood spread through the water as the shark thrashed its head from side to side, holding on to Jeffrey. The snorkelers nearby froze, watching the chaos unfold. Panic swept through them as they swam desperately toward the catamaran. Their adrenaline surged, pushing them forward. Reaching the ladder, they scrambled aboard, breathless and in shock, trembling with fear. The crew quickly accounted for everyone else. No one else had been injured, but the passengers were in shock. From the deck, they could see the dark silhouette of the shark below the surface, carrying away half of Jeffrey's body. It moved with eerie calm, disappearing into the depths. Minutes later, the shark reappeared, Its snout and eyes broke the surface near Jeffrey's remains. It moved slowly, opening its jaws once more, and seized the rest of Jeffrey's body. Then, with a swirl of water, it vanished, leaving only silence behind. The crew radioed authorities reporting the attack and requesting help. Emergency services advised them to return to Geraldton immediately. The Matrix motored toward the mainland, its passengers silent and pale. Word of the incident spread quickly, and local fishermen and tourists were warned to stay out of the water. Police and fisheries officers launched a search for the shark, hoping to recover Jeffrey's remains for a coroner's report. Helicopters and patrol boats circled the wreck point for hours, but the strong currents carried away any trace of the tragedy. By sunset, the search was called off. Rory McCall, a shark researcher, explained that there was no clear reason for the shark's appearance. There had been no fishing nearby, and the snorkelers hadn't been chumming in the water. However, the proximity to the continental shelf where deep-water predators often hunt made shark encounters possible. Great whites are known to traverse the western coast of Australia, though sightings near coral reefs are rare. Jeffrey's death shocked the tight-knit maritime community. Friends and colleagues remembered him as a man whose love for the ocean was matched by his kindness and generosity. His father described him as a carefree and dedicated young man who had turned his passion into a career. The passengers and crew of the Matrix struggled to process the tragedy, haunted by the memory of the once peaceful waters turning red. While shark attacks in Australian waters are rare, this event was a stark reminder that the ocean is wild and unpredictable. For Jeffrey Brazier, the sea that had been his sanctuary became, in an instant, the source of his untimely end. In the days that followed, Jeffrey's family received countless messages of sympathy. His father recalled how many friends Jeffrey had made, noting his ability to connect with everyone he met. The attack had left a deep wound in the community. No one had expected such a tragedy in such a beautiful, serene place. March 14, 2015 was clear and windless along the rugged coastline of Duker Point, just south of Cape Town. The Atlantic shimmered with deceptive calm, lapping gently against the base of towering cliffs that had become a magnet for thrill seekers. The waves slapped rhythmically against the rocks, birds wheeled overhead, and on top of the cliff a group of university students stood barefoot in the sun, daring each other toward the edge. They weren't tourists, they were locals. They knew the coast, knew the rumors, and knew that below them the water churned with currents colder and deeper than it looked. But that afternoon, they didn't care. The plan was simple: cliff diving. No wetsuits, no gear, just a quick plunge into the open ocean and a scramble back onto the rocks. Among them was 22-year-old Jordan Macefield, tall, athletic, and the kind of extrovert people naturally followed. Jordan had always leaned into risk. He was the one who suggested Duker Point in the first place. The area had a reputation known for its dramatic rock faces and deep entry points. It offered one of the few spots where you could jump from over 30 feet into the ocean without hitting reef or sand. But it also carried another much darker reputation. The nearby rocks were home to a seal colony, dozens of slick barking bodies that sunbathed on the shoreline and slipped like shadows into the water. And where there are seals in the Cape, there are great white sharks. The group knew this. Signs had been posted a year earlier after multiple shark sightings, warning against swimming or diving in the area. Local rangers had updated the advisory list just 2 days before, noting increased predatory activity in the shallows. But by the time Jordan and his friends arrived that morning, the surf was low, the cliffs were dry, and the temptation was stronger than the caution. One by one, the group began to jump. Jordan was last. He raised his arm, shouted something no one quite heard, and hurled himself off the ledge. He hit the water cleanly and surfaced a moment later, grinning and throwing his fist in the air. The others cheered from above. But then, without warning, something massive surged from below. There was no splash, no warning fin, just a violent jolt that pulled Jordan backward under the surface as if a rope had been yanked from the deep. A few seconds passed, then the water near the jump site turned red. Great white sharks are deeply woven into the marine ecosystem of South Africa's Western Cape. Dierker Point, just south of Cape Town, lies along the edge of what's known as the Shark Alley Corridor, where cold Benguela currents meet rich breeding grounds for seals, tuna, and other prey. Here, great whites don't migrate through, they stay. Scientists have tracked the same individuals returning year after year, using coastal shelves and sea colonies as ambush points. Their hunting relies on stealth. They strike upward, fast and silent, using the contrast of sunlight on the surface to target silhouettes. In areas like this, where rocky outcrops host hundreds of seals, and human activity overlaps with feeding zones, a splash in the wrong place can look exactly like a kill trigger. Jordan had leapt into the center of their territory. At first, the group thought it was a prank. Jordan was known for stunts, and the sudden disappearance looked staged. But when he didn't resurface and when a second cloud of blood appeared, darker and whiter than the first, the mood shifted. Screaming erupted. One of the students tried to climb down the cliff toward the shoreline while another ran for cell reception. A third called emergency services as the rest stared helplessly at the calm surface where their friend had vanished just seconds earlier. Rescue teams arrived within the hour. The National Sea Rescue Institute launched a search using boats, divers, and a helicopter equipped with thermal imaging. They scanned the coastline for hours. No body was ever found. A single torn swim fin was recovered near the edge of the seal rocks, but beyond that, there was nothing. Officials confirmed that shark activity had been recorded in the area days earlier and reiterated that Dierker Point had never been a sanctioned diving location. A temporary restriction was issued, and signs were reposted with more prominent warnings. Jordan's University held a memorial later that week. Flowers, stories, and a worn photo of him mid-jump on a hiking trip, suspended in the air with his arms wide open. Friends remembered him as fearless, impulsive, and always chasing the next thrill. But even those closest to him admitted he pushed too far. He saw the warnings and jumped anyway. It was May 12, 2023 when Melissa Carpenter zipped up her wetsuit and stepped into the morning that would change everything. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, casting gold across the Pacific, and the shoreline at Torrey Pines was unusually still. The kind of stillness that hums in your chest and makes you wonder if something's waiting just beneath the surface. The tide pulled in slow, steady breaths, and somewhere far off a seagull cried. It should have felt peaceful, but peace can be deceptive. Melissa had driven to the beach before dawn, gripping the steering wheel tighter than she needed to. The crash had taken so much, her ability to walk unaided, her career momentum, her sense of control. Recovery had been slow and brutal. 8 months of physical therapy, weekends relearning how to sit, how to stand, how to trust her body again. Surfing wasn't just a bucket list whim, it was the final threshold. If she could ride a wave even once, maybe she could finally leave the trauma behind. She was the kind of person who did everything quietly but with purpose. A woman who remembered birthdays, sent handwritten notes, and left groceries on doorsteps without signing her name. Her apartment overflowed with greenery and watercolor paintings of birds and tide pools. Before the accident, she volunteered at the animal shelter and spent weekends sketching by the bluffs. Friends called her gentle. Her therapist called her resilient. Melissa didn't see herself as either. She just knew she didn't want fear to dictate her life anymore. The decision to try surfing had come in a moment of instinct, spontaneous but strangely certain. The ocean had always represented something sacred to her. Not adventure, but rhythm. Not adrenaline, but surrender. This morning, with the sun rising and the beach mostly empty, she believed she could claim a small piece of herself back. By 7:30 a.m., she was standing barefoot in the sand, staring at the waves like they might speak first. Jake Mendoza, her instructor, waved from down the beach. He was easygoing, confident, and already setting up 2 surfboards. He'd been briefed about Melissa's history and promised they'd take it slow. Just fundamentals, safety first. They started with warm-ups on the beach. Jake walked her through the basic posture, the motion of paddling, the importance of knowing how to fall. Melissa practiced the pop-up again and again, stumbling on the soft sand, then correcting herself. Her movements weren't graceful, but there was progress in each try. Jake nodded. She was ready. By 8:30, they were waist-deep in the water, and Melissa felt the first true flicker of doubt. The sea, cool and vast, swallowed her lower half. The water was only 65 degrees, but it felt colder, sharper. As she floated over a small breaker, her breath hitched. The sensation was too familiar, floating, weightless, uncertain. She remembered the moment the car spun, the way gravity had vanished, the silence before impact. Jake was beside her. He tapped the nose of her board and reminded her to breathe, to let her board hold her, to remember she was in control. Melissa nodded. She pressed down with her palms and adjusted her position, letting the board carry her out past the turbulence. The waves calmed, the sky opened wider, and for a moment it felt like progress. But peace never stays. By 9:45 a.m., they had moved farther out, about 50 yards from shore. The waves had picked up slightly, gentle rolling swells that lifted Melissa's board with grace. From the beach, the lifeguard tower stood like a distant watchman, the figures of sunbathers and early swimmers scattered across the coastline. The world looked soft from out here, almost unreal. Jake scanned the water. He saw a clean wave rising in the distance and pointed to it. Not too fast, not too steep. He told Melissa to paddle. She did. The board surged forward beneath her. She pressed her palms flat, brought one knee forward, then stood. For 3 seconds, just 3, she balanced atop the wave, arms outstretched, mouth open in a breathless smile. That was when the water beneath her erupted. A massive force collided with the underside of her board, lifting it violently and throwing her clear into the air. Melissa slammed into the sea with a hard splash, her breath vanishing on impact. She came up gasping, eyes wide, limbs flailing. Jake was already paddling toward her, assuming she had wiped out. Then he saw it. The water just beyond her shifted in a way that wasn't natural. A shadow, thick and fast, cut through the swell. It turned, curved, disappeared beneath her. Then the dorsal fin surfaced. The shark was enormous, nearly 11 feet long, dark gray and heavy-bodied. A mature female bull shark. Though neither Melissa nor Jake had time to consider species, they only saw the size, the speed, and the sickening stillness that followed each movement. The board had drifted 6 feet away. Melissa was treading water, disoriented. Jake yelled for her to get back on it, loud, sharp, insistent. She reached for the board. The shark moved again. It circled once, its dorsal fin cutting a clean arc across the surface. Nearby surfers had started paddling hard for shore, yelling warnings. From the lifeguard tower, a whistle screamed across the waves. But it was too late. The second strike came from the side, fast and absolute. The shark clamped down on Melissa's right thigh just above the knee and pulled her under in a red bloom. Jake reached the spot seconds later. There was nothing but froth and blood. Then she surfaced screaming. Her leg was mangled, muscle torn wide open, and the water around her bloomed crimson. Jake grabbed her under the arms and hauled her half onto his board. His lips were pale, his limbs shaking. Blood poured in pulsing waves from the wound. She was alive, but not for long. Lifeguards were already in motion. One sprinted from the tower while another paddled toward them on a rescue board. From shore, scattered onlookers were now standing frozen, their gazes locked on the commotion unfolding in the surf. The shark returned. Its fin rose again, carving straight toward them. Jake didn't hesitate. He pushed Melissa onto the rescue board as the lifeguard reached them. Then he turned, placing himself between her and the advancing shape. The shark struck his board hard, snapping it near the tail. The impact sent him tumbling sideways into the water. As Jake surfaced, he saw the lifeguard paddling fast, Melissa clinging weakly to the rescue handles. Jake grabbed the broken half of his board and thrashed it against the water, trying to create noise and confusion. It worked. The shark veered and circled him briefly, then vanished below. He swam hard for shore. When they reached the beach, Melissa was ghost pale. Her pulse flickered beneath her skin, shallow and fast. Lifeguards hauled her onto the sand and began CPR immediately. A crowd gathered in stunned silence, drawn by the chaos but unsure what they were witnessing. Jake collapsed beside her, covered in salt and blood, breath rasping from his lungs. Paramedics arrived 7 minutes later. They worked fast. Oxygen, compressions, epinephrine, but nothing slowed the blood loss. Melissa never regained consciousness. At 10:37 a.m., she was pronounced dead. The official cause, exsanguination from a severed femoral artery. Drone footage later confirmed the shark was a bull shark, one of the largest recorded in Southern California in years. Nearly 11 feet long, likely displaced by warmer waters or confused by shifting feeding patterns. The beach was closed for 48 hours. Scientists called it unusual but not unheard of. The ocean, it seemed, was changing. Jake disappeared from the surf scene, not in a dramatic way, he just didn't come back. The website for his surf school went offline within the week. The boards he used for instruction were never claimed from the beach rental shack. He didn't give interviews, didn't post on social media. Some said he moved north, others said he took a job inland far from the water, but no one really knew. After a while, people stopped asking. Melissa didn't come looking for a thrill, she came searching for peace, a quiet return to something she had lost. But the ocean doesn't care why you enter. It was a calm and sunny afternoon in Middle Harbour, Australia on January 4th. The waters off the estuary shimmered under the light, a tranquil scene framed by the dense brushland that lined the shore. Zetta Stedman, 27, had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Along with her friends, she had planned a picnic at Egg Rock, a picturesque spot nestled in the rugged coastline off the North Shore. The morning had unfolded beautifully. They had arrived on a motor launch, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of the boat's engine as they approached the secluded cove. Middle Harbour was known for its serene waters and abundant wildlife. Despite being relatively enclosed and far from the open ocean, the estuary's connection to Sydney Harbour meant it occasionally saw visits from larger marine creatures. Among these were bull sharks, notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both salt and fresh water. Zetta and her friends, aware of the area's reputation, dismissed the risks. After all, the water seemed so inviting, clear, shallow, and harmless. Zetta's day had started early, her excitement evident as she prepared the picnic essentials. In her small kitchen, she carefully packed a wicker basket with freshly baked bread, ripe fruit, and other treats. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows, promising a warm and pleasant day. It was a perfect setting for their long-planned outing. By mid-morning, she was on her way to the dock, where her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Bowes, Mrs. Reeve, and her son-in-law Frederick waited, already exchanging light-hearted banter. By mid-afternoon, the group had settled into their picnic. The scent of the sea mingled with the aroma of their food. They lounged on blankets spread over the rocky shore, sharing stories and enjoying the stunning views of Middle Harbour. Nearby, cicadas buzzed, their sound blending with the gentle lapping of waves against the rocks. As the day progressed, Zetta, the ever-adventurous one, suggested they cool off with a swim. The others hesitated but eventually agreed, and soon the group was wading into the water, laughing as the coolness contrasted with the heat of the day. At first, they stayed close to the shore, splashing in waist-deep water. But as the minutes passed, Zetta ventured further out, drawn by the clarity of the water and the allure of the deeper blue beyond. She stood in chest-high water, enjoying the gentle sway of the current and the feeling of weightlessness. Her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Bowes, called out to her from closer to the shore, cautioning her not to go too far. Zeta waved back, smiling, and began to make her way toward them. Unbeknownst to the group, a predator was already nearby. A 14-foot bull shark, a master of ambush, had silently entered the estuary. Its movements were deliberate, its senses tuned to the vibrations of its surroundings. It had likely been drawn by fish or other prey in the area, but now it had found something else, something larger, more tantalizing. The shark circled Zeta, its shadow passing unseen beneath the surface. It cocked its head slightly, sizing her up. Its movements were patient and calculated. Then, in a sudden burst of speed, it struck. Zeta felt a force like a vice clamp onto her lower body. The water around her exploded into a frenzy of movement and foam. She screamed, her voice piercing the tranquil air and sending her friends into a panic. From the shore, Mrs. Reeve, one of Zeta's friends, watched in horror. Perched on a rocky outcrop, she had a clear view of the attack. She screamed for her son-in-law Frederick, who had remained on board the motor launch a few feet away from Zeta. Frederick turned to see Zeta thrashing in the water. Without hesitation, he grabbed an oar and dove into the water, swimming toward her with all his strength. Frederick reached Zeta and swung the oar with desperate force, striking the water near the shark's head. The blows made little impact on the determined predator. The shark began pulling Zeta further into deeper waters, the reddish cloud of blood spreading ominously around her. Realizing the oar would not suffice, Frederick swam back to the motor launch and started the engine. He steered the boat toward the shark, aiming to ram it. The boat's hull struck the water with a loud splash, narrowly missing the predator. The shark released Zeta momentarily but lunged again, dragging her further into deeper waters. Frederick leaped from the boat, grabbing hold of Zeta's arm. With a strength born of desperation, he pulled her toward him. The shark resisted, thrashing violently, but Frederick's grip held firm. Finally, with a sickening tear, the shark relinquished its hold. Frederick pulled Zeta's torso onto the boat, but the lower half of her body was gone. The water around them was stained red. Zeta was unresponsive, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Frederick called to the others on shore to call for help. The motor launch sped toward the nearest dock, but it was clear to all on board that Zeta's chances were slim. By the time they reached land and paramedics arrived, she was gone. In the days that followed, the attack sent shockwaves through the community. Reports of the incident dominated local news, and authorities issued warnings about sharks in Middle Harbor. The bull shark that attacked Zeta had ventured into the estuary, taking advantage of the shallow, warm waters that provide the perfect hunting grounds for this species. Bull sharks thrive in such environments, where their ability to adapt to low visibility and diverse prey makes them one of the most dangerous predators in these areas. In July 1994, the waters off South Africa's coastline had become a hunting ground. Unbeknownst to swimmers and surfers, sharks had been drawn closer to shore in recent weeks, following migrating fish, seals, and the seasonal calving of southern right and humpback whales. The presence of these apex predators wasn't immediately obvious until it was too late. On Saturday, July 9, 1994, two friends, Bruce Corby and Andrew Carter, headed to Nahoon Reef, one of the Eastern Cape's most renowned surf spots. The area, known for hosting international competitions, boasted near-perfect conditions that day. Powerful rolling waves, a light breeze, and warm winter temperatures. For experienced surfers like Bruce and Andrew, it was an invitation they couldn't resist. As they pulled their surfboards from the roof of their car, they scanned the ocean. The sun reflected off the surface, the waves cresting at nearly 6.5 feet high. Other surfers were already in the water, carving through the swells. Strapping their leashes to their ankles, Bruce and Andrew paddled out about 220 yards just beyond the breakers. Below them, the reef created a perfect foundation for the rising waves, the water shifting between 8 and 12 feet deep. They caught wave after wave, their bodies moving with ease, completely unaware of what lurked beneath. After surfing for about half an hour, Andrew Carter felt a sudden violent impact from behind. Even before he turned to look, he knew it could only be one thing: a shark. As he twisted around, he came face to face with a massive great white, nearly 12 feet long. A surge of terror gripped him, but there was no time to think. The shark's jaws clamped around his leg, the force crushing his bones and shredding flesh in a single bite. At first, shock and adrenaline dulled the pain, but the sheer pressure of the attack was unbearable. He let out a desperate scream, the water around him turning red as he thrashed in the shark's grip. A nearby surfer, seeing the chaos unfold, panicked and paddled frantically toward shore, leaving Andrew alone to fight for his life. The shark continued its attack, trying to pull Andrew off his board, but he clung to it with every ounce of strength he had. Just when it seemed like he would be dragged under, the predator loosened its grip. Andrew acted fast, shoving his board into the shark's mouth as it lunged again. The great white snapped down, thrashing its powerful head from side to side, momentarily distracted. Taking his only chance, Andrew swam with everything he had, but the shore was still agonizingly far. He knew he couldn't outswim the shark. A quick glance back sent a fresh wave of terror through him. The shark had released the board and disappeared below the surface. It was circling, preparing for another attack. In desperation, he scrambled back onto his board, knowing it was his only chance. John Bourne, another surfer, had seen the horrific scene unfold and rushed toward Andrew. Amidst the swirling blood in the water, John spotted an oncoming wave, their only hope. He shouted at Andrew to catch it. Incredibly, the 6-foot swell lifted Andrew up and carried him toward the shore, pushing him away from the shark's reach. His leg was barely attached, but he focused on nothing but survival, praying that the wave would take him all the way in. He refused to look back, terrified that the shark was still following. Finally, he reached the shore, collapsing in agony. Screaming for help, Andrew barely clung to consciousness. 2 girls sunbathing nearby sprinted toward him, dragging him out of the surf and onto the sand. They worked frantically to slow the bleeding, using one of their tops as a tourniquet. His leg was nearly severed, hanging on by just a few inches of flesh. As his vision blurred, darkness crept in. He could hear muffled voices, feel his body growing cold. In those moments, he thought about his family, his friends, and whether this would be the end. But paramedics arrived just in time, racing to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Though he had survived, his nightmare was far from over, and the shark wasn't finished. While Andrew was lucky enough to catch the wave and get hauled out of the water, Bruce was still struggling to paddle to shore. And moments after letting Andrew go, the great white launched itself toward his friend Bruce Corby. Without warning, the beast struck, its jaws clamping down on Bruce's leg with terrifying force. He barely had time to cry out before he was yanked from his surfboard and dragged under. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, and the immense pressure around his leg was unbearable. Then, in a sickening instant, the shark's jaws closed tighter, and his right leg was completely severed just above the knee. Freed from the predator's grip, Bruce kicked desperately, fighting his way to the surface. He gasped for air, blood pouring into the water around him. The shark, meanwhile, continued to attack his surfboard, thrashing violently. A nearby surfer rushed toward Bruce, trying to get him onto his board, but panic and blood loss made it nearly impossible. Struggling to stay afloat, Bruce managed to pull himself onto his own board and began a desperate attempt to reach shore. A lucky wave finally helped carry him toward the jagged rocks. As he neared the shoreline, he shouted in agony, his voice barely audible above the crashing surf. "My leg is gone! I've just lost my leg!" Surfers on the beach ran to his aid, pulling him out of the water and onto the rocks, using another surfboard as a makeshift stretcher. He had been conscious up until then, but the massive blood loss was quickly taking its toll. Just minutes after reaching the car park, Bruce lost consciousness. Paramedics were already on the scene for Andrew, and they fought to revive Bruce, stabilizing him long enough to rush him to the hospital. But tragically, he never regained consciousness. Bruce Corby was pronounced dead the next day at just 22 years old. Andrew was taken to the hospital where he stayed for 2 long, agonizing months. Although they didn't have to amputate his legs, the doctors told him he might never walk again. But after months of recovery, against all odds, he defied their expectations. He learned to walk. In the aftermath of the attack, once fully healed, Andrew left South Africa, moving to the UK for more therapy and respite. The memories of that fateful day never left him, but he defied all odds. Not only did he learn to walk, but he even returned to surfing off the southwest coast of Britain. To this day, he still keeps the surfboard from that day, stained with blood and marked with a massive bite out of its side. It serves as a chilling reminder that no matter how skilled a surfer might be, in the eyes of a shark, they are still prey. Shark attacks have long been debated. Were they cases of mistaken identity? Were humans just an accidental meal in the eyes of these apex predators? In most cases, sharks bite once and then swim away, realizing that humans are not their natural prey. But this attack had been different. This shark had shown no hesitation, no mercy. It had struck twice, aggressively, relentlessly. First Andrew, then Bruce. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a calculated assault. Bruce Corby's death served as a chilling reminder of the raw, untamed power of the ocean. July 15, 2023 began like any other summer day in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. The azure waters off the Red Sea sparkled under the morning sun, inviting tourists to escape the scorching 95-degree heat. The air was thick with salt and sunscreen, while the gentle lapping of waves against the shore provided a deceptively peaceful backdrop. Sharm el-Sheikh, a resort town nestled between the desert of the Sinai Peninsula and the Red Sea, had transformed from a small fishing village into Egypt's premier diving destination. Despite its pristine reputation, the area had witnessed several shark attacks in recent years, though none had prepared the resort for what was about to unfold. Eric Anderson, a 34-year-old software engineer from Stockholm, Sweden, had always been drawn to the sea. Growing up along Sweden's eastern coast, he developed a deep connection with water from an early age, spending summers sailing with his father in the Stockholm archipelago. His mother, a marine biologist, had instilled in him a deep respect for ocean life, though some would later say this respect had turned to complacency. After graduating from KTH Royal Institute of Technology, Eric's successful career at a prominent tech company allowed him to travel extensively, and he had visited over 20 countries for their marine experiences. The evening before the incident, Eric spent time at the hotel's beachfront bar, Waves and Wishes, sharing his diving experiences with other guests. When a diving instructor suggested he stick to guided tours in these waters, Eric dismissed the warning, citing his extensive experience swimming with various shark species since his early 20s. This trip to Egypt was meant to be a celebration of his recent promotion, a solo adventure before taking on new responsibilities at work. But the waters of the Red Sea held a predator that cared nothing for experience or confidence. Tiger sharks are among the most dangerous shark species in the world, second only to great whites in recorded attacks on humans. These powerful predators can grow up to 16 feet in length and weigh over 1,400 pounds. Known as garbage cans of the sea, tiger sharks are notorious for their indiscriminate feeding habits, with powerful jaws capable of crushing turtle shells and serrated teeth designed to tear through any prey. Their name comes from the dark stripes along their bodies, which fade as they age. Unlike many sharks, tiger sharks are known for their tenacity and willingness to approach shallow waters, making them particularly dangerous to beachgoers. Eric had arrived at the Sunrise Diamond Beach Resort 3 days earlier, quickly establishing himself as an enthusiastic swimmer. The hotel staff knew him as the tall Swede who was always first in the water, often swimming beyond the designated safe zones despite warnings. His confidence came from years of recreational diving and his strong athletic build. At 6'2" and 185 pounds, he considered himself more than capable of handling any aquatic situation. At 8:45 a.m., Eric entered the water for his morning swim. The beach was relatively quiet, with only a handful of early risers setting up their loungers. Ahmed Khalil, the 23-year-old lifeguard on duty, noticed Eric swimming past the safety buoys, but couldn't get his attention despite whistling several times. The sea was calm that morning, with excellent visibility extending nearly 100 feet below the surface. At 9:01 a.m., Ahmed noticed something unusual. The usual schools of colorful fish that dotted the shallows had vanished. The water took on an unnatural stillness. 2 minutes later, a shadow moved beneath the surface, too large and too powerful to be anything but a shark. The tiger shark's dorsal fin briefly broke the surface, cutting through the water like a knife before disappearing again as it moved toward the unsuspecting swimmer. Eric, now approximately 500 feet from the beach, remained oblivious to the danger approaching from below. The tiger shark, estimated to be around 14 feet long, made its first pass beneath him, creating a sudden pressure change in the water. The initial strike came without warning. The shark's powerful jaws clamped onto Eric's left thigh with devastating force. Tiger sharks can exert up to 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch in their bite, nearly twice the force necessary to break bones. The water around Eric erupted in a crimson cloud as he called for help, his voice carrying across the now still morning air. The shark's attack was brutally efficient, demonstrating their characteristic bite and sever technique. The predator clamped down and shook its head violently, using its serrated teeth like a saw to tear through flesh and bone. For 3 minutes, Eric fought against the shark as it circled and struck repeatedly. Each attack targeted a different area: his legs, torso, and finally his right arm. The water around him turned dark red as other guests watched from the shore. Ahmed and another lifeguard, 27-year-old Mohammed Saeed, launched a rescue boat, but the distance and the shark's aggressive behavior made immediate rescue impossible. 52-year-old British tourist James Wheeler attempted to launch his kayak toward Eric, but was restrained by hotel staff, who recognized the futility of such an attempt. On the beach, tourists retreated as the attack continued, while hotel staff cleared the water of remaining swimmers. At 9:08 a.m., Eric's movements began to slow from blood loss. The shark made one final devastating attack, pulling him under the surface. When his body resurfaced 30 seconds later, he was motionless, floating face down in the bloodied water. Emergency responders reached Eric at 9:12 a.m., but it was too late. The official cause of death was listed as extensive blood loss and massive trauma. The autopsy revealed over 32 distinct bite wounds, with the fatal injury being a bite that nearly severed his torso. The medical examiner noted that the pattern of wounds was consistent with tiger shark attacks, showing the characteristic saw-like tears from the shark's serrated teeth. The incident led to a temporary closure of several beaches in the area and renewed discussions about shark safety measures along Egypt's Red Sea coast. Local authorities implemented additional monitoring systems and increased patrol boats in the area. The Sunrise Diamond Beach Resort installed a new warning system and doubled their lifeguard staff. Despite these measures, tourism in Sharm el-Sheikh suffered a significant decline in the months following the attack, with beach attendance dropping by 40%. The aftermath of Eric's death sent shockwaves through his family. His parents, Lars and Maria Anderson, learned of their son's death while at their summer home in the Stockholm archipelago. Lars, a retired naval officer, immediately flew to Egypt to identify his son's body and handle the complicated process of international death arrangements. The Swedish embassy in Egypt worked closely with local authorities to expedite the repatriation of Eric's remains, a process that took 11 days due to Egyptian regulations and the extensive documentation required for deaths involving animal attacks. The tiger shark responsible for the attack was never found, though local authorities continue to monitor shark activity in the area more closely. The incident remains one of the most thoroughly documented shark attacks in Red Sea history, serving as a case study for marine safety experts and a sobering reminder of nature's raw power. In the ocean, one wrong move can mean the difference between life and death. These shark encounters were just a glimpse into the dangers that swim below. If you want more jaw-dropping stories, click on the next video.